741. Arrive at Mount Greylock. After Loren explained what had caused the incident, Pickley and Nancy didn't look surprised. The aftermath of the Brooklyn Dementor episode was still being felt. The United States government had publicly held the Magical Congress to account. Lord Voldemort was no longer only a wanted criminal in Britain's wizarding world. He'd become a globally notorious wizard terrorist, second only to Grindelwald in infamy. I heard the Ministry helped Dumbledore expel Voldemort and the Death Eaters, Pickley said. Our overseer always complains that British law is too soft. People like him should be executed outright. Pickley led them away from the airport toward a nearby commercial strip. The Ministry hasn't executed dark wizards for decades, he went on. The execution chambers below the Ministry were turned into courtrooms. Prisoners get sent to island gaols and left to the Dementors of Azkaban. Loren glanced at Hermione. The future Minister of Magic furrowed her brow slightly, and he hurried to explain. Those changes were passed by the entire Wizengamot. Dementors can't simply be removed by ordinary means. Using them as custodians eases tensions between Dementors and humans. It keeps them from spilling into Muggle society. Pickley shrugged. Whether swapping the death penalty for a life of Dementor torment is humane or progressive is another question entirely. Hermione opened her mouth but said nothing. They stopped at a small gift shop near the airport, the kind of place people dash into to pick up last-minute souvenirs. The single clerk behind the counter straightened as the group entered, then, seeing the emblem on Pickley's chest, sat back down with a bored sniff. Loren scanned the store. It was full of trinkets, except for the mirrors. A scrying mirror at the door, one on the counter, another on the shelf. Under the scrutiny of half a dozen scrying mirrors, they were shown into the back room. Nancy took a wizard hat off the wall, the ridiculous orange pumpkin lantern sort. Loren and Hermione exchanged a look. This was a portkey to Ilvermorny. They gripped the brim and waited for the magic to hook them. Bang! There was a brief, compressing jolt. When they opened their eyes again, all four felt slightly unreal. One moment they had been in New York. The next they were on Mount Greylock, facing dense forest with no sign of steel or fossil fuel. The air was clean and the sky a soft sunset orange. In early August, London and New York were both uncomfortably warm. Here the temperature had dropped more than 10 degrees. Loren pulled out two thick coats, handing one to Hermione and pulling the other on himself. Nancy rolled the hat into a small cloth pouch and tied it to her belt. Ilvermorny has strict wards and alchemical defenses, she said. The portkey can only get us to mid-mountain. We'll have to walk the rest. Loren looked at the rocky path and said aloud, Do you normally have to climb a mountain to get to class? Pickley laughed. Ilvermorny's a boarding school. There are buses at the beginning and end of term. It's summer. The buses aren't running. Loren's expression was complicated. Spatial displacement felt convenient to him, but he'd never been to Ilvermorny, and getting lost would be a nuisance. He'd like to have notified the headmistress to send Fawkes to fetch them, but this wasn't his jurisdiction. Showing up and asking favors felt presumptuous. Let's go, he said. We'll try to make it before dinner. Pickley and Nancy led the way. The four of them climbed along winding tracks, past cloud-shrouded crags, through low-hidden caverns, and into steep, wooded slopes. The higher they climbed, the friendlier the terrain grew, and at last the school revealed itself, half hidden by trees and mist. Loren looked up into the clouds and saw a glow unlike sunset light, a strong fluctuation of magic, with the faint burn of alchemical sigils. Hogwarts could rely on Hogsmeade. Ilvermorny had nothing outside its defenses. It felt like the classical image of a magical academy, perched on a remote summit, ringed by rock and forest, sealed by enchantments from the prying eyes of muggles. Ilvermorny kids pick their wands after the sorting, Nancy chattered as they walked. The cores are the usual suspects. Horned Serpent, Thunderbird, Wampus. One of the founders was a muggle, so we don't turn our noses up at muggle tech as much as other schools. They reached the summit. The castle sat on an improbably flat plateau. From afar it had looked like treetops and cloud, but up close its outline was clear. Two massive statues flanked the main entrance. Those are Isolde Sayre and her husband James Stewart, Pickley said reverently. Hermione looked up. I still find it impossible to believe Stewart was a non-wizard. That's why Ilvermorny is respected as one of the most democratic and inclusive schools, Nancy said. Pickley and Nancy's faces were full of admiration. Graduates who had worked alongside Muggles in the Magical Congress and come to appreciate what the couple had built centuries ago. Loren, who could be sternly exacting, nodded. They approached the platform at the base of the statues. The Ilvermorny crest was carved into the stone, 4 animals marking the cardinal points. At the top soared a thunderbird, to one side a horned serpent, to the other a pukwudgie with a bow, at the bottom a sleek wampus. Entering the great hall left Loren and Hermione slightly stunned. The ceiling glittered with bright electric lights, an unexpected mixture of magic and Muggle convenience. They followed a corridor and came to a circular chamber. Nancy's voice echoed, "This is the assessment hall. New students are first brought here for the sorting ceremony." The chamber rose through 3 levels. The topmost was a terrace. The middle held 4 wooden effigies representing each house, spaced evenly. The floor below was a circular stone slab inscribed with a complex knotwork pattern, a large Gordian knot design inlaid into the rock. Nancy looked at them, eyes bright. "Want to try?" Loren and Hermione exchanged bewildered looks at the older student leading them, but both were secretly curious about Ilvermorny's sorting ceremony. They glanced up at the 4 towering statues and followed Nancy Boots' guidance toward the circular platform in the center. Directly in front of them loomed the horned serpent, its mouth open, tongue flicking, an intimidating presence. The gems set into its brow and eyes gave off a soft glow that, oddly enough, felt more calming than threatening. Hermione remembered from the book that Horned Serpent House favors students who love reading and thinking, Ilvermorny's analog to Ravenclaw, a house that prizes wisdom. Those facts ran through Hermione's mind as she stepped onto the platform and felt the tiniest ripple of sensation pass through her. Then, with a faint crackle, zzzt! It wasn't the horned serpent that answered her, but the thunderbird to her right. A crystal blue current ran across the carved bird, the wooden wings shivering as if a distant storm were gathering. Nancy, standing below, smiled and said, "Thunderbird likes those who value adventure and can bravely go into the unknown. The flapping means it wants you." Hermione pursed her lips. She had hoped for the horned serpent. Loren watched, unsurprised, and thought how thoroughly Ilvermorny wore its centuries of history. Thunderbird's values blended Gryffindor courage with a dash of Slytherin ambition, boldness with a grand purpose, which seemed to suit the young witch on the platform. When Hermione stepped off, Loren heard her murmur, half to herself, "Ilvermorny's sorting is uncannily accurate." Loren moved to the center of the circular platform, its ornate design like a giant Gordian knot, and studied the 4 statues. The horned serpent, unlike more violent creatures like basilisks or cockatrices, had been hunted for its parts. Almost every part of its body could be used in wands or potions. Centuries ago, it had been driven nearly to extinction in Europe and the Far East. The ones in the Americas were said by some to have come with settlers, flourishing without the old predators and potion makers. A few scholars argued the American horned serpents had mutated, trading venom for the gem on their brow. Legends attached to that gem claimed powers of invisibility, flight, and in rare cases, foresight. Ilvermorny's founder, Iseult Sayre, had once fashioned a wand from a horned serpent horn for her adopted son Chadwick. That wand later warned its owner during Gormlaith Gaunt's raid, giving them time in a crucial duel. The Thunderbird, related by blood to the Phoenix, inhabited North America and had left traces in Muggle myth. The most recent notable incident was 1926, when Newt Scamander used a Thunderbird in the uproar that shook New York. The Wampus, a 6-legged, panther-like beast from the Appalachians, could walk upright, run faster than an arrow, and as an adult possessed hypnotic, near-Legilimens eyes. The Pukwudgie, by contrast, were not beasts but a subhuman, goblin-like folk, short, gray-skinned, long-eared, and gifted in their own potent brand of magic. Iseult once rescued a Pukwudgie from an invisible monster. He stayed to help her and was later known to school historians as William. He repaid her kindness by helping run and build the school. Wisdom, body, heart, and soul, the 4 houses represented different virtues. A faint, crystal blue light skimmed Loren as a subtle, searching magic swept over him. Ilvermorny did not use a sorting hat that read minds. Instead, the statues sensed the magic around each student. Emotions, some theorists said, were how the soul regulated magic, and the houses detected those emotional signatures. Loren thought the theory had holes. Emotions can be complicated, and a pure magical reading might be unreliable. But he listened as the platform chimed. First, the horned serpent's brow gem glowed brightly. The thunderbird beat its wings. The six-legged wampus lowered its shoulders and gave a low growl. The pukwudgie, miniature and fierce, drew a string on its bow and notched an arrow. All four statues had reacted to the same student at once. Books said this happened only rarely. When more than one house expressed interest, the final choice belonged to the student. Nancy laughed and elbowed the lanky boy beside her. The last time this happened, it was Pickery's grandmother, she said. By the way, Pickery's name comes from Mrs. Seraphina Pickery's family. Pickery Greaves, Pickley, as everyone called him, lounged against the wall, amused. So, Loren, he asked, grinning, which house do you want? Loren shrugged. I think this sorting method has loopholes. If you get a student who can't decide, the professors will have their work cut out for them. He shook his head and stepped off the platform. Nancy and Pickery exchanged a look, both considering what Loren had said. Pickery mused aloud, if someone really had a psychological block, the statues wouldn't have all reacted like that. Footsteps sounded on the balcony above them, and a steady, warm voice answered. A group of familiar figures appeared, stepping out into view. Albus Dumbledore beamed his broad smile, and beside him, Ilvermorny's headmaster, Egilbert Fontana, chuckled softly. Are you really not choosing a house, Mr. Morgan? Dumbledore asked, voice teasing. Then, inclining his head to Hermione, he added, and Miss Granger, Ilvermorny has always been an open-minded school. We welcome transfer students from abroad. 743. Notice from the book club. The old group was nuked. RIP. There's no way to get it back, so we've started a new one. Direct links are at the end of every chapter and on the book's details page. 744. Make a choice. Good evening, gentlemen. Loren's voice rang clear and hearty as he smiled and swept his gaze around the circular hall. He quickly spotted the wooden staircase that led up to the wide balcony encircling the chamber. Hermione, equally pleased, fell into step at his side. The balcony was spacious, originally reserved so professors and visiting students could watch the sorting ceremony with an unobstructed view of the enormous Gordian knot and the sculpted details atop several statues. Tonight, 3 professors stood there. Dumbledore, Snape, and Egilbert Fontana from Ilvermorny. Pickley and Nancy, still at Ilvermorny, made their slow way up the stairs, idly tracing the carved handrails with a touch of nostalgia. Snape wore his usual sullen, cold expression as if everyone in the room owed him thousands of galleons. Dumbledore, however, stared intently at the great knot below, his bright blue eyes shining with the eager look of a man who wanted nothing more than to go down and try it. Loren suspected that if Dumbledore did, the papers would feast on the story. The current headmaster of Hogwarts enrolling at Ilvermorny. The last exchange to Hogwarts was far too rushed, Fontana said with a chuckle, comfortably at home on his own school grounds. The Triwizard Tournament distracted everyone, and it took a while before I truly appreciated what you have. My dear children, are you not at all tempted by my invitation? Loren paused, then asked seriously, We've been at Hogwarts 6 years. Professor, what reason would you give us to transfer? Ilvermorny has an independent alchemy research center, and we're actively exploring Muggle technology. Look at these electric lights. On some fronts, we're certainly ahead of Hogwarts. We also offer selection exams for the Magical Congress if students aspire to political careers. Loren looked thoughtful, genuinely weighing the words. How long is the curriculum? 7 years, like Hogwarts. How are fees handled? We grant scholarships to outstanding students. Loren rubbed his chin, asking practical questions now and then. Hermione looked a little helpless, and the others' faces grew complicated. At first, they'd assumed the two were joking, but the conversation only grew more serious. It had to be a joke, right? Do you run holiday camps? Like Dragons in Romania? Not just dragons. Our Magical Creatures summer program has many events. Loren nodded, then turned to the bearded man beside him. Did you hear that, Headmaster? Hogwarts should have things like that too. Everyone was surprised. Dumbledore nodded in earnest agreement. Fontana's surprised look melted into laughter. Later, at dinner, Fontana described the investigation they'd launched. When we received your message, we immediately began a full sweep. With aid from the Magical Congress's specialists, we sampled and searched every tree in the area. Shallow soil, potential nests in the crowns, hollows in trunks. They listened to the account while enjoying a sumptuous meal. The cuisine showcased Ilvermorny's hospitality. The electric candelabras cast a soft, dancing glow across the table. The experts from the American Magical Congress had already been dismissed. Fontana said only that a dark magical artifact had been found somewhere in Ilvermorny's forest. After tracing the leads, the rest had been left to the school. Newt Scamander had been invited as well. The famed magizoologist had archived work with the Congress and was an old acquaintance. Pickley and Nancy looked stunned. Neither could digest all the news at once. A murder to create a Horcrux to escape death, resurrection. The most powerful dark wizard had hidden a living Horcrux in their school. The principal had explicitly ordered that the Horcrux be kept from the Magical Congress. It was a tangle of truths and half-truths, and both students felt their heads swim. Sleep would be difficult tonight. You may find this hard to believe, Fontana went on, but in the course of the investigation, we found many prohibited items, some even labeled with student names. Next term's opening will be lively, to say the least. Loren finished the juice in his glass, and a Pukwudgie waiter came forward to refill it. The small, distant relatives of goblins stood about the height of a house elf, 2 or 3 feet tall, with long, slender ears and gray skin, partially hidden beneath neat, formal wear. They lingered in dim corners and only stepped forward when a guest needed them. Loren nodded in thanks. The Pukwudgie returned a courteous smile, neither obsequious nor proud. Hermione watched them. These short, semi-human servants inevitably invited comparison with Hogwarts house elves, but their demeanor was different. Ilvermorny's Pukwudgies were not subservient. They behaved more like paid staff, businesslike and straightforward. A transaction was a transaction. When the Pukwudgie noticed Hermione's scrutiny, he smiled at her and indicated she could call on him any time. Hermione withdrew her gaze, thoughtful. Their role at Ilvermorny seemed to be a normal employment relationship. Perhaps it dated from the school's founding. Or perhaps it reflected the Pukwudgie's own power. Outside Ilvermorny, they had a poor reputation for mischief and distance, but they retained a certain sovereignty, more akin to the goblins of Gringotts than to the lowly house elves. They dealt with wizards on equal terms and engaged in commerce. The bad news, Fontana said in a low voice, is that the most anomalous presence in the forest is the snake tree. The good news is, the snake tree is not the Horcrux itself. We suspect Lord Voldemort hid the living Horcrux inside the trunk, deep within the heartwood. The table fell quiet. The Hogwarts visitors chewed more slowly. Loren stared at the reflection on his silver table knife and thought of the mirror of Ericid, of images and desires. Everyone had assumed Voldemort would make the snake tree, Slytherin's tree, into a Horcrux. He had been clever. He'd hidden the living Horcrux in its trunk, making it both dangerous and concealed. Voldemort thought he was clever, Fontana said, voice calm but resolute. He believed the snake tree's tenacity would protect his filth. He assumed we would guard the tree with all our hearts. He was wrong. Ilvermorny will not be defiled. We are prepared to remove this stain, even if it means cutting away our own flesh, even if it means destroying the snake tree itself. Pickley and Nancy watched the professor quietly. After dinner, the guests retreated to their rooms. There were no students at Ilvermorny in summer. The mountain lay quiet, its wild beasts scarce, and the castle protected by sound-silencing charms. If not for the thin mountain air, the visitors would likely sleep well. Still, with a living Horcrux in the wood behind the castle, Ilvermorny had work to do, and the 2 young wizards were exhausted after a long day. The school needed time to prepare. As night deepened, Fontana could not sleep. He switched off the electric lights in his room, leaving only a desk lamp, and stepped onto the balcony in his pajamas. The summer air and the spread of the grounds below let him replay the day. He needed to answer the Magical Congress. Summoning their teams for an emergency and then sending them home inside a single day required justification. He could not reveal the snake tree's corruption, nor could he disclose the Horcrux. How did one write such a report? No matter how he framed it, the Congress would find it hard to swallow. Fortunately, he had provided clues linking the case to Voldemort and his followers. That gave him leverage. It might be enough to muddle through. But the source of the clues was difficult to explain. Let's just pin it on Albus, he thought with a rueful half-smile. Knock, knock. A soft but distinct knock sounded, and Pukwudgie Williams' steady voice came from the door. Professor, the two new guests have turned off their lights and gone to sleep. Don't wake them. Understood. The sounds receded. Fontana rubbed the balcony railing with his fingers and thought of the two young wizards he'd just met, Loren Morgan and Hermione Granger. 2 years ago, during the Triwizard Tournament at Hogwarts, they had shown themselves to be exemplary students with excellent marks. When McGonagall organized special training, Fontana had been present and had seen their talent firsthand, yet at the time his attention had been mostly on Harry Potter. Dumbledore and Snape, however, had always spoken of Loren in quiet asides. Tonight had confirmed Fontana's vague impression. Something lay beneath Loren's composed surface. Several students had discovered the Horcrux clue together, but Dumbledore's tone had made clear Loren had led the effort. Such gifted students, why hadn't they started at Ilvermorny? Meanwhile, in Wiltshire, at an estate owned by an unknown merchant, Draco Malfoy woke from a nightmare. His days had been chaotic since he'd taken over Malfoy family accounts for the holidays. Even his dreams followed that disarray, like old photos flickering in and out. Snatches came first. The Quidditch World Cup final 3 years ago, smoke and screams, crowds in panic, the dark mark in the sky, his Aunt Bellatrix lurking nearby, her scarlet eyes like two vertical slits. The next piece was a year ago, the dim courtroom under the ministry, his mother chained in the defendant's chair, her once flawless makeup gone, her face white and hollow while scornful eyes tore into her. He had sat in the gallery, helpless as slander and extortion took hold, and the House of Malfoy was squeezed for every last galleon. The last fragment was present and immediate. His father, forced to flee with Voldemort and now in hiding, huddled in darkness, speaking to him through a communicator. Then his father turned toward the serpent eyes of their master and a flash of green light. That image hovered. On the desk in front of him, Draco noticed a message his father had sent only minutes before. Do not ask where I am. Take good care of your mother. The metallic glow of the letters on the communicator reminded Draco that it had been only a dream. He surfaced slowly, feeling as if he'd been dredged from the bottom of the Black Lake. He rubbed his forehead to ease his tension and glanced at the clock. 2 hours had slipped away. He should finish the accounts, but when he tried to write the numbers on the parchment, the quill stalled. The figures seemed monstrous and unreadable. It was impossible to focus. He heard footsteps in the corridor and a gentle knock. Draco, are you resting? Mother, I'll go to bed after I finish this last page. Do you want something to eat? I'll have the house elf make it. Those lazy creatures haven't even cleaned the carpet properly lately. No, thank you. All right then, get some rest. As her footsteps faded, he exhaled. Even as her son, he could not deny that some of the charges in that courtroom had been true. He picked up his quill, but could not bring himself to continue. Rest would not come easily, so he reached for the small galleon communicator instead, almost mechanically tapping out a message. He didn't try his father or any of his usual allies. Without quite knowing why, he selected another contact, Loren Morgan. Loren's name on his communicator had amassed messages before. Few of them answered. He liked the distance. He liked that the relationship was what it was. Unexpectedly, Loren replied. The response was not empty consolation, but information. A series of details about a living Horcrux, about Ilvermorny, about Voldemort. Draco read the messages once, then looked at his father's earlier note again. After a long, silent pause, he pressed the communicator's buttons as if speaking to his father and, for good measure, to himself. Betting on both sides is no longer an option. The House of Malfoy must make a choice. Chapter 743. Goodbye, Vincent Crabbe. Hermione sat up slowly in the tower guest room at Ilvermorny, smoothing her hair as she looked out the window. Owls dozed on distant branches. Clean clothes were folded at the foot of the bed, a silk Gordian knot tying them together. The little metal studs on the ribbon flashed colors in the morning light. She watched the shimmer for a moment before standing. In another attic guest room, Loren opened his eyes to unfamiliar furnishings and a mild disorientation. It was still early. He dozed a while longer and only got up when he heard movement in the corridor. Dressed, washed, and having straightened his bed with a flick of his wand, he went downstairs. Hermione was waiting at the end of the corridor, a Pukwudgie attendant nearby. She wore a faint smile and, half under her breath, asked the attendant questions about employment, pay, duties, holidays. Loren fell into step beside her and listened without interrupting. The attendant answered patiently, leading them to a side room off the Great Hall for breakfast. There were already several principals and professors at the table. Dumbledore and Mr. Fontana spoke in low, careful tones. Only fragments could be heard if you listened closely. Efficient replies, phrasing to avoid being pressed, how to choose a capable deputy. The general mood by the table was light and deliberately lax. Nancy and Pickley sat to one side with faint dark circles under their eyes, looking tired from a restless night. Loren ate in silence. "How were this year's NEDT potions results?" Snape asked abruptly. Loren swallowed a piece of bacon. "Principal Dumbledore's been here about a month. Didn't you ask him?" "He said only that the results were better than before. For specifics, he suggested I consult Professor McGonagall." Snape cut his fried egg into small pieces and ate with the same detached, economical movements he used in class. 15 more students earned top marks than last year," Loren answered. He glanced at Snape. Snape's potions teaching had always emphasized practical, procedural work, which helped students internalize underlying principles. Slughorn's Slug Club later turned those confused ideas into structured knowledge. Both approaches had their uses. Conversation petered out as the food warmed their stomachs. At 9, Mr. Fontana personally led the party toward the mountain forest behind the castle. They reached Ilvermorny's equivalent of the Forbidden Forest much sooner than they had at Hogwarts. The early mountain mist lay in pale ribbons through the trees, and a cool breeze brushed their faces. Their trouser legs picked up moisture from the path. The famous serpent tree stood on the flanks of Mount Greylock beside the stone house of one of the founders. Over the centuries, the grove had thickened until the tree crowns cut a jagged silhouette against the mountain, broad and impressive, if not individually massive. Vines formed a living fence around the innermost area. A warning sign declared that only the hospital wing and authorized researchers were allowed in. "Follow me." Fontana tapped the vine fence with his wand, and the vines twisted aside to reveal an arched opening. "When I was a student, there weren't such protections," Nancy said, as they stepped under the arch. "The serpent tree is vigorous. Ordinary wizards couldn't harm it. Sometimes students would take a leaf to treat a sick relative, and the school wouldn't pursue it. The serpent tree itself was less like an ancient legend and more like a strangely ordered, restrained giant. Its bark was rough, its trunk sturdy rather than gargantuan, branches coiled and twisted like pythons, but they did not inspire terror. Fungi and epiphytes grew on its surface. A vibrant green magic hummed through it, and standing beneath felt cleansing. Loren's mind wandered to Parseltongue and the old accounts of the Serpentwood wand. Ilvermorny's history said Gormlaith Gaunt had used Parseltongue to put the Serpentwood wand into dormancy. Iseult Sayre, unable to speak Parseltongue, couldn't awaken it, buried it, and the tree grew where it lay. If Parseltongue did something to Serpentwood, could this tree be the wand in another form? He didn't know Parseltongue well enough to try, but Dumbledore and the Ilvermorny researchers were well acquainted with such mysteries, and if necessary, Harry might help later. Fontana smiled as if he'd read the thought. To wizards on this continent, that Serpentwood wand is more of a legend than the Elder Wand. Many have coveted it. Parseltongue is rare, but not exclusive to any single bloodline. Over the centuries, Ilvermorny has had students with Parseltongue talent. Naturally, they wanted to command the wand. We didn't forbid their attempts, but none succeeded. He went on, 2 centuries ago, a young witch from Pukwudgie House, apparently distantly related to Slytherin's line, sang a Scottish folk song in Parseltongue. The tree swayed. That was all. She later became a distinguished healer, and the tree remained. Fontana chuckled. It's fortunate the tree is rooted here, otherwise Voldemort might have taken it. Ilvermorny once worked with the Horned Serpent clan on Parseltongue studies, Nancy added. We still record the voices of students who show talent and note translations, but nobody's yet formed a systematic grammar. Hermione listened, thoughtful. She was already mapping out courses and research programs in her head. Ilvermorny's openness to Muggle-style academic structures appealed to her reforming instincts. Loren glanced at Snape and felt a twinge of sympathy for Hogwarts. Ilvermorny's practical, adaptive methods were impressive, but Hogwarts's traditions had yielded extraordinary wizards. Tom Riddle, Dumbledore, and others. Old school versus new, each had its strengths. Dumbledore, who had been quietly observing the tree, suddenly straightened and shot Loren a brief, reproving look. Fontana said quietly, "Staff from the Magical Congress detected strange, very dark magic within the trunk. They suspect something, an object of the dark arts hidden inside." "We all know what it likely is, Agelbert." Dumbledore replied softly and looked at Snape. Snape stepped forward, pressing his wand tip to the trunk. Magic flared, and an invisible blade slid through the bark, cutting with cold, clinical precision. Milky sap spattered, and a pale green-white inner layer was exposed. The invisible blade sliced deeper until suddenly a geyser of crimson erupted. Snape jerked back. Warm blood sprayed onto the soil, soaking in and leaving a dark, coppery stain and a faint, sickening smell. Faces around the tree changed. Shock, anger, grimness. For a heartbeat, there was stunned silence. Fontana, Nancy, and Pickley went pale. The idea of something so cruel being buried in their sacred tree stirred both sorrow and fury. The tree reacted almost at once. The exposed wound twitched as bark pulled, and the incision began to knit. Snape, who had anticipated this, muttered a harsh spell, Sectum Sempra, and the rapid repair slowed, the healing becoming a drawn-out, ragged process. Snape moved his wand again, shifting his aim a little to the side and cutting deeper. Plant sap spattered, and occasionally the wound still spewed blood, but he kept working with the calm efficiency of someone who had practiced on darker things before. The others stepped back to give him room. As the opening widened, the thing within became discernible. Nancy covered her mouth. The body was male, built broad and muscular, but grotesque. Its skin had been replaced by dense scales, curling the figure into a fetal position. From the navel extended a fleshy umbilical cord that plunged into the tree's heartwood. The cord twitched occasionally, pumping in a pink sap-like fluid that kept the body alive. The scene was nauseating, like a laboratory's monstrous mockery of birth. A fully grown adult, sustained as if a test-tube child. Loren felt the dark magic prickling at his skin. This wasn't a natural graft. The chest bore the unmistakable mark of a Horcrux. The same hate-filled, corrupted soul magic he had encountered in other Horcruxes clung here. It was a refuge for a piece of Voldemort's soul, an attempt at preservation, at defying death. Dumbledore stepped forward. He laid his hand against the scaled face with rough, careful fingers. A transfigurative flow, barely visible like a ripple on water, spread from his palm. The scales began to melt back into flesh, the pattern receding as if someone were unpeeling a disguise. When the transformation finished and the skin smoothed, many of the onlookers found themselves staring at a pale, familiar face. Loren's gaze tightened. The face was not one he had seen often, yet something about its expression, the closed, cruel lines, triggered a memory in him, an uneasy recognition that he couldn't place at first. His pupils shrank as the sense of familiarity sharpened. Hermione had already stepped closer and then exhaled as if struck. "Vincent Crabbe," she whispered. Hermione and Nancy, present at the scene, forced down their nausea and stood watching the living Horcrux. The fresh scent of plants did little to cover the metallic reek of blood. Their faces went pale and their stomachs turned. They held their breath to keep from vomiting. Several grown wizards clustered before the snake tree. Dumbledore withdrew his hand from Vincent Crabbe's face, and the tree's vigorous life force rushed back into the body, dispelling the transfiguration that had been laid over him. Whatever semblance of a restored face had been there collapsed, replaced again by dense snake scales. The body kept its eyes firmly closed, apparently entirely unconscious. Dumbledore frowned and spoke in a low, measured voice. "Lord Voldemort has utterly transformed this body. The skin has been replaced by snakehide." Fontana and Snape said nothing, continuing to study this perverse dark creation. Fontana's attention stayed on the tree itself. Snape watched Crabbe, the vessel carrying the soul fragment. Loren's eyes were lowered, but his gaze swept the body with an odd intensity. Crystalline blue light flickered under his lids as he traced the currents of magic within. 3 distinct streams ran through the corpse. The strongest was the snake tree's vibrant green life force, poured in constantly through a fleshy umbilical cord tied to the tree's core, knitting wounds and powering essential biological processes. Coiled around the chest was black magic, the obvious locus of Lord Voldemort's soul fragment, working like a heart to root power through the body, drawing on the tree's life to strengthen itself and slowly reshape the host. And there was a third, nearly colorless stream, the remnant of Vincent Crabbe's original soul, a weak, guttering candle now being devoured by the black magic, close to going out. A flicker of recognition crossed Loren's face. He touched the pendant at his throat, drew forth the strange Dementor stone, and looked at the body anew. There was only dense darkness where Crabbe's personhood should have been. No other emotional trace remained. The hollow inside the tree was merely a shell for Voldemort's fragment to occupy. Vincent Crabbe, like Pettigrew before him, was gone. Fontana let his gaze travel from the corpse to the umbilical cord and the tree. The structure of the snake tree assembled itself in his mind. Living creatures bound within, magically rich wood without. The grotesque architecture of it felt disturbingly familiar. His expression hardened. "This is a wand," he said. Dumbledore considered the tree for a long moment before speaking, his voice carrying a complicated weight. As a descendant of Slytherin's line, Lord Voldemort sees himself as Slytherin's heir. He has always coveted Slytherin's relics, and he never abandoned the snake tree. While he lay hidden at Ilvermorny, he must have tried to reawaken a wand of snakewood, only to discover the original core had already become part of the tree. The old wand could not be restored. He let that hang for a beat, then continued. So he made a new wand core, something special and powerful, forged to match the snake tree. The sun slid down, painting the mountain ridges red, as though the forest itself were on fire. The castle's outer walls and turreted spires glowed orange. Loren leaned on the corridor railing and popped the last segment of an orange into his mouth. He held the peel in his hand, idly crumpling it and aiming at the shrubbery, then thought better of it. One must behave when visiting another school. In the forbidden forest at Hogwarts, biodegradable peels would be dropped under a tree to feed slugs and ants and return to the soil. Here at Ilvermorny, he walked a few steps, tossed the peel into a corner bin, and returned to his spot. Hermione and the 2 Ilvermorny graduates still sat on the steps beside him, their oranges untouched, eyes vacant, still thinking of the snake tree. The professors had dissected it that morning and then dismissed the students. The 3 had stayed behind in the forest to study. They'd missed lunch, and now a whole day had passed with no solution. They had destroyed Horcruxes before, sword, basilisk fang, fiendfire, so what new research could there be? Loren supposed the obvious. They were trying to find a way to remove Voldemort's soul fragment without destroying what was left of Vincent Crabbe. Otherwise, there was no saving him. The soul inside was gone. Unless Snape performed some ritual of resurrection, Crabbe was dead in all but name. Loren dreaded being entangled further in such messes. He glanced at the darkening sky. Dinner would be announced soon. He hesitated, about to peel another segment, when steady footsteps approached. The 4 young wizards looked up in unison as Dumbledore, white beard and slow tread, came toward them. The fatigue on his face had eased a little, his eyes crinkled at the corners. "The best thing about Ilvermorny is the view," he said. "Mountains give you lovely sunrises and sunsets." "Headmaster Dumbledore, have you come up with anything?" Nancy asked, eager. Hermione looked equally expectant, not from sentiment. She wanted Crabbe punished, though perhaps not executed. Dumbledore's expression tightened. "Regrettably, we have not." Nancy's face blurred into indecision. Many have given their lives under the wands of Voldemort and his followers. To end him completely, to restore the snake tree, we knew it would demand a price. He paused, then added, "But I ask Egelbert to wait 2 more days. The one who is bearing this price is Vincent Crabbe and his family." Pickley and Nancy only half comprehended. Hermione's brow furrowed in thought. Loren met the headmaster's eyes. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly at him. In a detached house in Brooklyn, Lucius handed a Gringotts key to Rodolphus. This underground vault at Gringotts, New York, was bought from someone else. Inside are a few thousand galleons and some property deeds, wizard residences. It should serve as a base for our next transfer. Rodolphus, believed to be the secret keeper of a Fidelius and currently second in command among the Death Eaters, took the key. Very good, Lucius. The Dark Lord will remember this. When the other man left, Lucius exhaled and pressed his hand to his chest. The relief of parting with another large sum of money eased some of his tension. Beside the cabinet, a fish tank held 2 ornamental goldfish floating belly up. The water, unchanged for 2 weeks, was murky with whiskey and wine. The other Death Eaters could burn and destroy, but they couldn't readily produce galleons in a foreign country. "I hope the Elder Goyle and the others cut down on the drinking," Lucius muttered. "We can't afford more expenses." He was alone on the sofa, and only he knew the real thought behind the murmur, never voiced. If anything went wrong, he too would end up floating like those fish. At that thought, a prickle of heat and burning flared over the place where the dark mark was branded on his arm. Cold sweat broke across his back. Rodolphus, who had not gone far, felt the same sting and turned back. Lucius rose and joined him. "It's the dark mark," Rodolphus said. "The Dark Lord summons." They hurried to the meeting room before the sensation intensified. The room was simple and spotless. Muggle tiles, whitewashed walls, a rectangular table with chairs neatly arranged around it. Familiar faces sat in place. Lucius, Rabistan, the Elder Goyle, Old Crab, Old Knot, heads bowed, eyes on the tabletop. No one looked at the figure at the head of the table, except Lucius, who couldn't help glancing. At the head reclined a man in a loose black robe. His face was pale and snake-like, the skin mottled, old burned scar tissue mixed with new pink flesh so that it looked more awful than mere scales. The voice that came out, hoarse and forced into a high hiss, slid through the room like a snake. "Lucius, Rodolphus, my most loyal servants, sit beside me." They obeyed. Lucius's hands trembled. He kept his head lowered, hiding every expression. He thought of the empty seat that would normally belong to Snape or Bellatrix and felt a stab of nostalgia. "It pleases me that we gather again," Lord Voldemort said calmly. "I know what you endured that night. I believe Albus Dumbledore, protector of Muggles and half-bloods, retains powerful magic, magic that might stop me and even protect you. They used schemes and borrowed power to impede me." He paced slowly, his gaze skimming each face as if it could probe their minds. Some Death Eaters trembled, some had already bowed their heads. "Many of you may be tempted, as you were 16 years ago, to return to them, claiming you were coerced under Imperius. But remember, I have found a way to evade death, and I have gone farther down that path than anyone." Silence pressed in. Lord Voldemort fixed those before him with an oppressive stare, then turned to Lucius. "I asked you to gather intelligence. Have you anything useful?" Lucius's voice was thin with fear and haste. He spoke of a bribed employee at the Department of Magical Law Enforcement who'd supplied interior blueprints of the Woolworth building. He spoke of an editor at the New York Ghost under Imperio with useful sources. He promised a meeting next week with someone at the Department of Treasure and Cauldron Management, the ministry's financial arm, who might help them influence the next Magical Congress election, a lever to seize control in this country. Lord Voldemort tapped the table with a long finger, the sound tiny and sharp. "I am pleased," he said, and laid a hand on Lucius's shoulder. "I have news to share as well." Lucius swallowed. Voldemort moved around the table with slow deliberation. "A friend in the Ministry of Transportation sent word. An acquaintance has completed immigration procedures and is about to arrive in New York. He is an old friend of ours. We should welcome him." "Who?" Rodolphus asked. The name cut the air cold as a blade. "Harry Potter, 747, Mrs. Eichmer." After the meeting was dismissed and Lord Voldemort had left, the oppressive weight that had filled the room suddenly eased, and the occupant's breathing grew audible again. Harry Potter. At the mention of the name, Lucius Malfoy's face tightened with a complicated expression. He was not the only one. The men seated near him exchanged looks. In low tones, the Death Eaters murmured the name and spoke of old defeats, of the night 16 years ago when they had attacked the Department of Mysteries for the prophecy, of the root on Easter a year ago. The Dark Lord's power remained absolute. None dared show disrespect. But repeated setbacks had begun to seed doubt. Perhaps Harry Potter really was a nemesis the Dark Lord could not simply crush. Holding Ilvermorny and the Magical Congress, striking back at the Ministry and at Hogwarts, were those campaigns genuine strategies or merely excuses to placate Voldemort? The sharper-minded among them had begun to lose hope. After a short silence, Lucius rose. "A Magical Congress clerk agreed to meet me. There might be news of Harry Potter. I'm going to see him." "I'll come with you," Rodolphus Lestrange said at once. "Which department?" "Clerical work, I think," Lucius answered, his expression taut. "It was a chance meeting. He's not a close contact. He may not even show up. He's acquisitive." "It's fine. Lucius gave me the key to the underground vault. There's coin enough to grease any tongue." At that, a few of the Death Eaters fell silent. Someone murmured about the vault key. Old Knot opened his mouth, then clamped it shut, wary of speaking out. Lucius ignored him and moved to where Vincent Crabbe's father sat. He clapped a hand on the man's shoulder. "We should gather intelligence. I heard you were here back then. Anything useful to tell us?" Vincent's father stared for a long moment, slow and vacant. Then he nodded, voice thin. "It was years ago. I can hardly remember." "Say whatever you do remember. Come, let's get a drink and talk." The clink of glass was sharp in the dim wine cellar, the liquor heady on the air. Crabbe drank like a man trying to steady himself. He had indeed been involved years ago. With help from old friends and an alliance of pure-blood families, they had bribed a Wizengamot judge, altered the charges against Vincent so they avoided imprisonment, paid bail, changed his name, spirited him out of the country, and arranged his transfer to Ilvermorny. For years now, there had been no word of the only son of the Crabbe family. "You've been lost," Lucius said quietly across the table. "Shutting yourself away, drinking all day, avoiding people. You even ignore Rodolphus. If it weren't for the Dark Lord's summons, you'd be in a vat of whiskey." The cellar was sealed and thick-walled. The hanging lamps cast a private light. There was no Dark Lord here, no scheming Death Eaters, only Lucius Malfoy across from an old acquaintance. Crabbe felt safe enough to let his guard drop. "When did it all begin?" Lucius asked gently. "After we came here? After Vincent vanished?" Crabbe's eyes went dim. For a moment, he looked like the scheming Malfoy he had always known. Lucius leaned forward, murmured muffliato, and tapped his wand. The spell filled Crabbe's ears, blocking out the rest of the room. Then, softer so only Crabbe could hear, Lucius said, "What if I told you I know where Vincent is?" The goblet fell from Crabbe's hand and smashed on the stone floor. "Welcome to the Ministry of Magic. Please state your name and reason for your visit." The mechanical voice in the telephone booth clicked as the dial's numbers spun back. The voice was flat and businesslike, coming not from the receiver, but as if an invisible official stood inside the booth. Harry glanced at the interior, while Professor McGonagall, standing beside him, held the receiver to her ear. "Minerva McGonagall, Hogwarts professor, accompanying Harry Potter to process emigration paperwork," she said calmly. "Thank you for your cooperation. Please wait." 2 silver badges slid out of the coin chute with a little tinkle. "Welcome. Please take your pass badge, pin it to your chest, and proceed to the security desk at the end of the hall to register your wand." Harry pinned his badge, engraved Harry Potter Emigration Procedures, to his robes. The floor of the booth gave a sudden shudder, and the whole apparatus sank. There was a metallic grinding sound and a flash of fine golden light, and when they blinked, they were standing in the elevator lobby outside the ministry's hall. Following McGonagall, Harry took in the changes. After rounds of destruction and rebuilding, the hall had lost some of its former grandeur. The dome no longer gleamed with gilt. The warm wooden walls and floors had been replaced with hard, cold stone slabs, practical and unlikely to be shattered by a rampaging basilisk or a well-aimed student hex. The flue fireplaces were stripped of their gold trim and given partitions to stop ill-intentioned people from leaping into other hearths. The great gold statue in the center was gone, leaving only a bare, circular pool. The sickles and nuts that used to ring at its base had all been fished out. There were few people about, perhaps because it was a holiday. Only the occasional uniformed wizard, clutching bundles of parchment, or tightly sealed briefcases. The elevator was the same in function, but its ornate gilt railings had been replaced with copperwork etched with alchemical motifs. McGonagall pressed for the sixth basement. The great door clanged shut, and the elevator creaked down, its chains rattling. "Level 6, Ministry of Transportation," intoned the disembodied announcement. They followed a straight corridor past doors labeled Flu Network Authority, Broomstick Regulatory Control, Apparition Test Center, Portkey Office. At the end of the hall, they knocked. Inside the Portkey office, the room was neat and tastefully arranged. The woman behind the desk had the careful, slightly old-fashioned elegance of someone who took pride in presentation. A tailored twillifit and tattings robe, black with dark green waves embroidered on the collar and cuffs, her golden hair half pinned back. She was older, but still attractive. "Professor McGonagall, what a pleasant surprise," she said with a warm smile. McGonagall inclined her head. "Madam Edgecombe, I'm sorry to trouble you." "Not at all. Marietta always talks about you. She says she wishes she'd been sorted into Gryffindor, or that you were Dean of Ravenclaw," Madam Edgecombe replied lightheartedly, rising to pour tea. Her gaze flicked for a moment to the lightning-shaped scar on Harry's forehead as she handed him a cup. "You must be Mr. Harry Potter. After your application came through, everyone in the department wanted to serve you. It almost sparked a duel." Harry smiled politely. Edgecombe set 2 sheets of parchment on the desk, exit documents already prepared. "Just fill in these details," she said. They bent to the forms: name, gender, age, occupation, reason for emigration. Edgecombe offered help with anything obscure, her voice patient and solicitous, Marietta's mother in a way Harry had not expected. When more than half the form was complete, Edgecombe casually asked, "By the way, what kind of portkey would you prefer? A leaky bucket, a smelly boot, an inkless pen?" "We'll be taking a Muggle airplane," McGonagall replied evenly and handed over the completed form. Harry noticed, just for a heartbeat, a flicker of surprise in Edgecombe's eyes. The look softened into the same gentle smile as though nothing had happened. They left the office, and the corridor fell quiet again. Harry muttered, "Professor, why do I have to go through these procedures when Loren and Hermione didn't?" "They've already been to New York," McGonagall said. "I don't think they went through this before either," Harry murmured. At that moment, a loud, explosive gust rattled the door of the Apparition Test Center, and the whole corridor vibrated. The door creaked open, and a ministry employee stumbled out, leaning against the wall to catch his breath. "Mr. Techross?" McGonagall asked, concerned. Techross forced a breathy smile. His face, usually pallid, had a faint flush, but he looked shaken. "Sorry to alarm you, just out testing some of Loren's theories." "You were? Apparating?" Harry asked, curious. Techross laughed weakly. "We're trying to improve how apparition works. Loren suggests that apparition, as we do it, separates soul and body. The disembodied soul moves through space, and the body follows, linked by a tug we don't fully understand. That puts enormous strain on the body, hence splinching. If the distance is too great or the body mass too large, the strain causes injury. Some researchers propose different models, moving the body ahead of the soul or moving them together. Our team's made some progress, but it's experimental. I can't give a tour yet, only a brief description." McGonagall did not press for details. Harry listened, intrigued, as the 3 of them headed back to the elevator. By the time the sun was gone, the mountains were wrapped in ragged clouds and mist. It was the 3rd day since they had arrived at Ilvermorny, and at last there was time to see the school properly. Ilvermorny, founded in the 17th century, was not as ancient as Hogwarts, but it had history enough. The courtyard flower beds held statues of noteworthy wizards, and the portrait-lined corridors were full of witty, well-informed pictures. Many spoke of interactions with famous Muggles, Benjamin Franklin, for instance, who kept encountering thunderstorms while experimenting with electricity because a wizard neighbor liked to tinker with weather charms, and Nikola Tesla, whose own contact with wizardry helped shape his work on lightning. Loren held Hermione's hand the whole time, unwilling to let go, and they wandered from painting to painting. Pickley and Nancy led them through the main teaching block, the neighboring towers, and a specially built museum of the school's history. Ilvermorny's pride in this regard rivaled Hogwarts. Loren and Hermione wore Ilvermorny knots pinned to their chests like students, blending in with the local style. By the time they emerged from the museum, it was completely dark. Pukwudgie waiters scurried along the corridors, ushering them toward a side hall for dinner. The principal and the professors were already at the table, and talk turned to more pressing problems. They had been trying to find a way to separate the living Horcrux from the serpent tree, but from an alchemical perspective, their results so far had been disappointing. 748. Death Eaters. The side hall of Ilvermorny's Great Hall. Dinner had finished. Several figures sat around a long table. In front of Snape was a small silver tray holding strips of raw flesh and a few scales. He frowned. Away from the snake tree, Crabbe's tissue will wither very quickly. Hermione and Nancy both pressed their lips together, forcing themselves to look at the peeled, bloody chunks despite the nausea. Loren sipped his now cold ice cream with an almost detached calm. He had examined the body the first time with a Dementor stone. There had been no emotional fluctuations. The original soul had been utterly consumed, leaving only an empty shell that drew its life from the snake tree. The dark magic inside it was slowly assimilating and transforming both the corpse and the tree. Crabbe had been made into a living Horcrux and a pre-prepared wand core for Lord Voldemort. Once the transformation finished, he would be able to mimic Slytherin's wood and supply a new snakewood wand. Loren was not surprised by the test results. What puzzled him was the timing of the display. He sat quietly and considered it. Putting the tray out after dinner would make people sick, but putting it out before dinner risked losing everyone's appetite. Crabbe has no consciousness, Snape said in a calm, clinical voice. He does not respond to external stimuli, cannot move, cannot eat. He is more plant than man, sustained by the snake tree. If we forcibly separate Crabbe from the snake tree, Snape continued, both would be damaged. The tree can recover, its life force is strong, but Crabbe would require potions to remain alive, and his body would only grow weaker. Like a vegetative state in Muggle medicine? Nancy asked timidly. Yes. Snape's tone was flat. Principal Fontana's face fell. As a guest at Ilvermorny, he had earned Dumbledore's and Snape's respect. He had led the investigation into the Horcrux and the snake tree. Despite his recommendation to delay a decision for 2 days, in the end, Ilvermorny would follow his guidance. He felt torn. The snake tree was the school's greatest treasure. He did not want it harmed. And yet, he could not merely consign a student's life to oblivion. He had checked the records. This was not only Vincent Crabbe of Hogwarts, but Pierre Crabbe of Ilvermorny. Fontana, who had stayed to teach after graduating and had worked as a teacher and administrator for more than a decade, could not make a decision lightly. There was 1 day before the deadline Dumbledore had proposed. He would wait. Albus, Fontana said, trying to sound hopeful. The relative you mentioned, can he get here in time? Or, confronted with what Crabbe has become, can he make a rational choice? The American Magical Congress and the school board are already uneasy. Ilvermorny must begin preparations for the new term 2 weeks early. We don't have much time. I don't know the exact situation, Dumbledore said. Fontana's hands tightened. He was a practical man, unused to uncertainty. Dumbledore looked toward Loren. Loren, you were the one to make contact. Any reply? Loren wiped his mouth with a napkin. I didn't contact Mr. Malfoy directly. I relayed the message through Draco. Mr. Malfoy is explicitly opposed to Lord Voldemort, but their stronghold is under a Fidelius charm. The location cannot be revealed. The secret keeper might be Rodolphus Lestrange, or it might be Bellatrix. She hasn't been seen in 2 months. And the snake tree? Dumbledore asked. I've already relayed it to Mr. Crabbe, Loren said. Very well, we wait. Fontana nodded slowly, thoughtful. Hermione lowered her head, eyes bright with thought. Potions and alchemy were not her strongest subjects, but Dumbledore's methodical thinking always intrigued her. She could pick up a few threads here and there. The more she followed them, the more cunning and revealing they became. Night had settled over the Death Eater's temporary stronghold, a roomy manor on the outskirts of New York. Magic for reconnaissance and warning shimmered along the courtyard walls, every inch of brickwork covered. There were only a few gaps for entrances, and guards were posted at those points. Some Death Eaters hid in tool sheds and security booths, Rabaston Lestrange's patrols made their rounds. Since Rodolphus announced the plan to attack Harry Potter, he had been thrilled and immediately tightened security, claiming it was to prevent leaks. What had been a loose watch became severe. The guards grumbled, but they did not dare complain to Lord Voldemort. The more prominent Death Eaters refused to do tedious guard duty, so Rodolphus's measures stood. They were long, dull nights. Everyone secretly hoped some unsuspecting Muggle thieves would break in to enliven things. A few months earlier in Brooklyn, such an intrusion had kept them entertained for days. Rodolphus had even forbidden unforgivable curses during those encounters to prolong the fun. Old Crabbe and the Elder Goyle were among the guard detail. Both had been Death Eaters in their youth, and after the downfall 16 years ago, they had somehow escaped Azkaban, an enduring embarrassment to those who had been imprisoned. They had never sought out the Dark Lord's whereabouts, and so had been able to avoid prosecution. That history left them with the less prestigious work of standing watch. They were posted to a side gate in shifts, one for the first half of the night, the other for the second. At midnight, the Elder Goyle arrived a little early to relieve Old Crabbe. Old Crabbe handed the shift over without ceremony, but then surprised his friend by not going to his room to sleep. "Going out so late?" the Elder Goyle asked. "Too stifling in here," Old Crabbe said. "I'm going out to find some fun." "Find some fun," the Elder Goyle grinned. "Why didn't you go earlier? You were the only one at the post. No one would know if you slipped off." "The Lestrange brothers are patrolling. They come by sometimes, can't leave for long." "The Lestranges again," the Elder Goyle muttered, annoyed. "They spent a decade in Azkaban and now lord it over us. A family of idiots. Let's see how long he keeps grinning." "Don't talk like that where he can hear," Old Crabbe warned. "I'm not stupid," the Elder Goyle said stubbornly. "We were big enough at Hogwarts to discourage anyone from saying it, remember? After graduation, we joined the Death Eaters, and nobody complained." Old Crabbe watched his old friend for a moment, and then, with the awkward honesty the two of them had always shared, said, "Sometimes I think we're both pretty stupid." "Slow to catch on, maybe, but not stupid," the Elder Goyle insisted. They had been thick as thieves since their school days, and that stubborn loyalty remained. Old Crabbe shrugged and left through the side door. He walked into the cool, empty night, then stopped, pulled out his wand, and turned back toward the booth. "I suddenly remembered," he said. "There's something important I haven't done yet." "What important thing?" "Obliviate." He watched the Elder Goyle's eyes go blank, and his expression slacken. For a moment, the older man seemed to melt back into those school days, gluttonous, lazy, easily led. Even as the Elder Goyle raised his wand, he offered no resistance. Old Crabbe had been foolish in his life, but in that moment he'd with a single, sharp clarity. He left the booth and vanished into the night. From a second-floor window, Lucius Malfoy glanced at the drunken Lestrange brothers below. His face stayed composed, unreadable. The old Malfoy maxim had been drilled into him since childhood. There are no eternal friends or enemies, only eternal interests. That calculation had kept the House of Malfoy alive and prosperous. The family knew how to offer benefits and reap them in return. The Crabbe and Goyle families did not bring calculated benefits, but their simplicity made them useful tools for cleverer men. With a little incitement, they could be set to useful tasks. Lucius had used them that way for years, reaping advantages while giving them enough crumbs to keep them loyal. Later, when he had a wife and son, Lucius had learned there were stronger bonds than interest, family ties, that occasionally informed his choices. He knew the Crabbe man was both stupid and loyal. That combination could be nudged. Lucius raised his goblet, drained it in one swallow, and then, drunk, collapsed beside Rodolphus. Mount Greylock, Massachusetts. Loren woke in the teacher's dormitory as sunlight spilled in across the balcony. The air was cool and damp, and unfamiliar birds called somewhere outside. An Ilvermorny uniform lay on the bed. He changed, tied his Gordian knot, and studied his reflection, a handsome, display-worthy face. Hermione was already up, wearing the school's cranberry red uniform that made her features even more refined. She stood in the corridor, reading the caption beneath a portrait, bright-eyed. "Smooch," she said under her breath, teasing. Loren replied. Nothing, she said, wiping a smear of toothpaste from her cheek with a bemused gesture. Loren leaned in to read the portrait's plaque with her. It commemorated an 18th century wizard who had established a sanctuary during the Revolutionary War, saving many witches and wizards from being dragged into the conflict. Died trying to repair a light bulb with his bare hands, electrocuted at 99. Loren read, and the portrait seemed to bristle at the familiar mockery. Hermione tugged him away before the portrait could scowl louder. 10 minutes later, Hermione led Loren into the side hall again for breakfast. Familiar faces clustered at the table, which held a steaming meal, though the absence of the Pukwudgie waitstaff left the room a little emptier than usual. Fontana brightened at the sight of the two students in uniform and came over, smiling. Nancy and Pickley noticed Loren's Gordian knot was slightly askew and discreetly helped adjust it. Fontana watched the exchange and then observed Dumbledore, who had been quiet for a moment. Snape's mouth twitched into a faint smile. "Loren," Dumbledore asked calmly, "can you apparate freely while at Ilvermorny?" "I think so," Loren hedged, unsure of exactly what the headmaster meant. "Then this task must be entrusted to you." Dumbledore paused, raised his voice a fraction, and called, "Fawkes! Chirp!" From Flame, the Phoenix Fawkes emerged in a shower of sparks and landed on Dumbledore's shoulder. Dumbledore stroked the bird's beak. "A guest has arrived halfway up the mountain. Bring him." With a burst of bright flame, the Phoenix vanished. Pickley and Nancy stared, eyes wide. Fontana opened his mouth to speak and then closed it again, waiting to see what would happen next. 749. Death Eater, Father and Son. The burly, bear-like middle-aged man picked his way up the Green Mountain path, staring ahead as the mist thickened. Years ago, when he had escorted Vincent to his transfer, servants had led them up Mount Greylock to Ilvermorny. After they arrived, he'd bought a carriage at the wizarding market for several hundred galleons and had no memory which beast pulled it. Thestral, Abraxan, he couldn't say. Ilvermorny had seemed so remote then, and with Vincent transferring mid-year, he figured the trip would be a hassle, so he left the carriage and whatever had drawn it behind. When he heard Vincent had disappeared, he hired searchers and even walked part of the mountain himself. It was summer. The foliage was thick and old trees crowded the slopes. He sometimes spotted vipers camouflaged among the leaves and faint wheel ruts where carriages had passed. There was no clear path. Crabbe couldn't tell direction. He only knew he had to keep going up. He pushed through the weeds, stamping a rough trail with his body. The summit held Ilvermorny's castle, but a cloud of mist and the dense forest made everything look the same. Despite climbing, he found himself circling back on the same ground. Protective enchantments around Ilvermorny prevented apparition straight to the school gates, so when he exhausted his options, he almost set something on fire to attract attention. A clear, piercing cry split the air overhead. Crabbe looked up but saw no bird, only a bright wisp of flame landed on his shoulder. Before he could react, it spread across him, burning neither hair nor skin but unmooring him from the mountain. The trees and weeds blurred, and suddenly he was somewhere else. The mountaintop was clouded in early morning light. Inside the castle, the side room off the great hall was dim. No electric lamps had been needed. Candles burned instead, wax dripping quietly down the holders. Platters of steaming bread, bacon, and eggs filled the table. Professor Snape's eyes were ringed with darker circles than usual. He hadn't slept, likely poring over the snake tree and the living Horcrux. Dumbledore and the other senior staff seemed uneasy in a way Crabbe couldn't place, so he simply watched them. At the long table, Loren and Hermione ate with their heads bowed, glancing toward the door now and then. Two young wizards who had returned to Ilvermorny after graduating huddled nearby, whispering about the flames and the phoenix they had glimpsed. "Was that Fawkes?" one murmured. "I heard only Dumbledore's ever attract a phoenix," the other replied. "Has our headmaster ever raised magical creatures?" "Does a Pukwudgie count?" Hermione listened, shook her head, then leaned toward Loren and whispered, "What did the headmaster mean when he said work?" "Receiving a guest," he answered. "A guest? A victim's family member, and an accomplice of the suspect." Hermione chewed her bread and let a slow understanding settle in. Protective enchantments at Ilvermorny and Hogwarts were different. Ilvermorny's reached farther down Mount Greylock, nearly halfway. But both wards only blocked apparition. They couldn't stop spatial displacement by magical creatures or house elves. Flames flared again at the entrance, and a figure stepped through. He was tall and broad, shoulders like a bear, thick-muscled in sleeve and trouser, middle-aged with a receding hairline and a weathered face. "Mr. Crabbe," Dumbledore said. "Dumbledore." The older man's gaze drifted around the room, dazed. "Long time no see, Mr. Crabbe. You look exhausted. Would you like some breakfast? Sit and rest a while." Dumbledore's voice was deep and gentle. Plates of bread, bacon, eggs, and a glass of milk appeared before the Death Eater, as if he were nothing more than the parent of an ordinary student. Crabbe sat a moment, staring at Dumbledore as if trying to remember him. The others nearby were familiar in outline, but he didn't care anymore. Whether Severus Snape was a spy or whether the two youngsters were friends of Harry Potter meant little now. He was bone-tired, his head throbbed, and every limb felt leaden. Unable to pinpoint Ilvermorny and barred from apparating to the mountain's foot, he had made a clumsy, exhausting journey, escaping a Death Eater stronghold and apparating steadily across the night from the outskirts of New York to Mount Greylock. It had taken all night. "Lucius told me you found Vincent," Dumbledore said. Crabbe's face flickered with hope. For decades, he had been quick to anger and used to shouting, but now his voice came out soft. "I know what you want from me. As long as he's safe, I can tell you things about the Dark Lord." Dumbledore sighed. "Please don't misunderstand. We sent word through several channels. There was a consideration for Lord Voldemort and the Death Eaters, yes, but this was primarily a professor notifying a parent." "Where is he?" Crabbe asked. "Come with me." Dumbledore set down his silverware, rose, and led Crabbe toward the forest behind the castle. The others rose and followed in silence. They pushed through a thicket and approached the snake tree. The mountain mist clung low, the woods thick, and in the hollow of the largest, luscious tree something moved. Crabbe peered into the hollow and immediately saw the pulsing pink umbilical cord and the monstrous body it fed, a body sheathed in scales. It looked vaguely familiar, but he didn't let his mind dwell on it. Dumbledore glanced at the snake-scaled form and explained, "This body is sustained by the snake tree, connected by a flesh-and-blood umbilical cord. Lord Voldemort split his soul and anchored a fragment to Vincent Crabbe's body, consuming the original soul. He used dark arts to transform both the snake tree and the body, hoping to fashion a wand with extraordinary power." Crabbe made a sound in his throat. "Can you save him?" "His soul has been extinguished," Dumbledore said softly. "If we maintain this condition, the body will become a wand core. If we separate them outright, the body will shrivel and die." "He's already dead, then?" Crabbe's voice was flat. No answer came, but everyone present understood. He reached into the hollow and laid his hand on the body. Where flesh should have been, there were cold, hard scales. He inhaled and, with a voice steadier than his limbs, said, "Headmaster Dumbledore, could you leave us alone for a while?" "Of course." Dumbledore turned and led the others away. When they'd gone, Crabbe did not examine the body further. He leaned his back against the tree and stayed there. He had never been good with children. His temper had shaped their interactions into shouts, scoldings, and sometimes worse. He didn't know how to say goodbye, so he simply stood, keeping vigil. The mist rolled and thinned, and the sun edged west. The day brightened, then dimmed toward sunset. By evening, his legs were numb and his muscles ached. He had not eaten or drunk in a day and a night. His whole body ached and his eyes blurred. Somewhere between dusk and dark, he thought he saw the scales fade and a face emerge beneath them. He kept his mouth shut to steady his voice, then let out a raw, barely audible sound. "Vincent?" The empty shell stirred as if at a name. A pale, articulated hand reached out and brushed Crabbe's fingertips. That touch, so slight and so human, sent a rush of strength through the old man's exhausted frame. He looked up at the orange sky, drew his wand with trembling fingers, pressed its tip to the cold shell of the body inside the hollow, and forced the word out of his throat. "Fiendfire." The setting sun was a molten orange-red, the clouds glowing a softer yellow. One side of the mountain forest canopy was gilded in the sunset's warmth, the other side already swallowed by shadow. The treetops formed a clear boundary between light and dark. In the very center of the forest, a somber ceremony took place. The firelight fell across Old Crab's tired, numb face like the glare from a brass memorial bust. It was not the last glow of day, so much as a flame that never quite went out. The serpent tree cracked and moaned, and thousands of fallen leaves whipped into a spiral of flame. The inferno was bound to the tree by some unseen magic, consuming itself until only ash remained. Deep within the hollow, the empty shell of Vincent Crabbe lay curled, eyes closed. The flames fed on half the trunk and licked at him. Serpent scales that had once shone melted into black rivulets, and the charred human shape twisted under the heat as the great canopy burned away. Firelight and twilight mixed and colored the sky. On a thick fir branch at the outer edge of the vine barrier, two figures stood, their outlines blurred by the red light. Closer inspection showed an old wizard with white hair and beard, and a young one not yet of age, with a delicate face, watching the serpent tree from afar. The younger wizard remembered being chased all over the castle by Crabbe in his first year. That violent, ruthless image had stayed with him. Now Crabbe's body and build were much the same, but the old arrogance of a school board member had vanished. Loren sighed. "Professor, do you think if his son had lived he would have stayed loyal to Lord Voldemort?" "Who can say?" Dumbledore's deep blue eyes were unfathomable. "I am 115 years old. Nearly a century of experience teaches me that indulging in what-ifs has no bearing on the reality before us." The headmaster watched the flames. The firelight reflected in his eyes. "We all imagine if only," he said softly, "but there is never an if only." Loren had no taste for philosophy and fell silent, staring at the blaze. From the soulless husk in the tree hollow, a wisp of black smoke rose, thickening into a mist that congealed into a skull-like visage amid the flames and emitted a sharp scream. It lasted only seconds before the fire swallowed it. Old Crabbe, who had watched everything, was not afraid. If anything, the sound pleased him. The Dark Lord had shrieked like a common wizard. As the sunset's color drained away, the fiend fire finally began to die. Night settled, stars appeared, and a crescent moon hung in the sky. In the end, there remained only the lower trunk and a knotted root. The living Horcrux that Salazar Slytherin's wand, brought across the Atlantic by his descendants and rooted here for 1,000 years, had grown into was gone. What had once carried the Dark Lord's attempt to cheat death had been defiled and reduced to ash. The son of that house had turned to ash as well. A middle-aged wizard watched the ruined face through ragged breaths, sweat beading on his forehead. He covered his chest as his heart thudded faintly. "Vincent Crabbe," he murmured. He spoke the name again, then turned away and walked back toward the castle. He needed food and sleep to gather his strength for the revenge he intended. A father's grief aimed at the most powerful dark wizard in the world. That evening dinner started later than usual, but the food was as plentiful as ever. Loren drifted through the corridors and noticed that Old Crabbe was not in the side hall or the main hall. Over the meal, a few of the younger wizards eavesdropped on the professors and learned what they could. Old Crabbe had given useful intelligence and had been sent to the hospital wing to recuperate. There was nothing truly wrong with him beyond utter exhaustion, one day and night of ordeal and a terrible blow to his spirit. A good sleep would set him right. It was a reminder of how different, larger, tougher bodies were. Old Crabbe had needed 3 drops of the draught of living death to be put under, while an ordinary wizard would have been out cold after a single drop. Lord Voldemort had been quiet recently, still recovering from last year's defeat. The Death Eater's stronghold remained under the Fidelius charm, and Old Crabbe was not the secret keeper, so he could not reveal its location. The most important news was that Voldemort had apparently learned that Harry Potter would be traveling to New York and was preparing to strike. The source was said to be a spy still inside the Ministry of Magic, though who it was remained unknown. Dumbledore seemed unsurprised. Loren could not read any visible anxiety on the headmaster's face. "It's a pity the serpent tree burned," Loren said. Fontana, sipping champagne and smiling, replied, "The serpent tree isn't dead. Its roots remain at Ilvermorny. Once we clear the decayed trunk and remove the rot, new branches will sprout in spring." Pickley and Nancy relaxed. Hermione, puzzled, asked Dumbledore, "Professor, are Professor McGonagall and Harry still coming to New York? Why won't they cancel the trip? Because the tickets and arrangements have already been made, Dumbledore said, and because the living Horcrux was never their target. He explained patiently. Lord Voldemort has suffered setbacks and is skittish now, like a rat in a pipe. If he believes all Horcruxes have been destroyed, he will vanish into hiding and be far harder to track. Besides, Harry's life has been entwined with Voldemort's since 16 years ago. Harry has a long life ahead of him. He cannot spend it sequestered in narrow places like the school or the ministry to avoid Voldemort forever. Hermione fell silent, thinking. The Ilvermorny wizards around them were baffled. Loren looked up, probing. Professor, did you already suspect there was a spy in the ministry? Did you leak Harry's whereabouts to bait Voldemort out so we could catch him when he attacked? Dumbledore shook his head. Before this, it was only suspicion. Mr. Crabbe's confirmation made it certain. Loren pursed his lips. Who knew what the old man was truly thinking? August 4. Overcast. Loren saw again the portkey shaped like a wizard's hat, and from Pickley he learned the details of the ambush. The American Magical Congress's investigation had found that a group of dark wizards had been holed up in Brooklyn for about 2 months. Their presence had, perversely, driven down Muggle crime, robbery, theft, extortion, blackmail, because the Death Eaters policed the area in their own brutal way. After they moved away, crime rates crept back up. Dumbledore and Fontana had shared the findings with the appropriate authorities. Old Crabbe's intelligence and prior inquiries had confirmed that wizard terrorists were hiding in New York, and the American Magical Congress, remembering the Dementor incident, approved a counterterrorism operation. After breakfast, they set out. Loren and his group drove to the mountain edge to leave the spatial lockdown, then activated the portkey to New York. The 3 professors and Old Crabbe used a different portkey. They had other plans and were due at the Woolworth building first. Loren went to the small craft shop beside New York's airport to wait for Harry's plane, listening to Nancy lay out the operation while he and Hermione whispered plans. Pickley, predictably, had taken the grandstanding role. The 4th Auror Squad is setting the wards and waiting for the Death Eaters to walk into our trap. Once they do, we'll seal off apparition, he announced. The 3rd Squad is shepherding passenger evacuation. Disguised as airport staff, they've convinced everyone who can be persuaded to leave. Those who won't go are being directed into shelter rooms to keep Muggles out of harm's way. The 2nd Squad has shielded the electronics. All recording and video devices will go dead at the right moment. The Department of International Magical Cooperation has arranged with the Muggle authorities to divert other flights to JFK. Loren listened. 4th through 2nd Squads are covered, he said. What does the 1st Auror Squad do? Nancy hesitated, expression subtle. They handle combat security. Combat security, Loren and Hermione echoed, confused by the phrase. They protect Pickley, Nancy admitted. Pickley is in the 1st Squad. The others' job is to keep him safe during the fighting. Loren and Hermione exchanged a look and said nothing more. Above the Atlantic, a blue and white Boeing 77 roared through the sky. The glossy brochure Harry had picked up under the reading light was nothing like a sheet of parchment. The steel bird itself fascinated him. As a Quidditch player, he loved any craft that flew. An announcement crackled through the cabin. The captain welcomed them on Flight 941, reported cruising speed and an early arrival, and noted that New York's weather was overcast. Professor McGonagall sat by the window, eyes closed. A passenger in the right seat of the row ahead wore a felt hat, face shadowed. The cabin was unusually quiet, and the flight comfortable, aside from the slight pressure in Harry's ears. He was absorbed in the brochure until a familiar face passed and took a seat 2 rows ahead. Then another, distinctive pink hair, and another. He could hardly believe it. Remus, Tonks, Sirius, he blurted. The 2 in front turned and smiled. Harry, long time no see. The passengers who, in truth, were bait for the operation had only belatedly learned why they were coming. The Ministry had received the same intelligence Dumbledore had relayed. Minister Scrimgeour felt the capture of Voldemort and his followers was the Ministry's responsibility, not the Americans', so he had sent several core Auror teams and allied them temporarily with the Order of the Phoenix to join the encirclement. Harry looked around and saw many familiar faces in the hold. Kingsley Shacklebolt, the Longbottoms, Proust, Williamson, Elphias Doge, Daedalus Diggle, Emmeline Vance, Sturgis Podmore. Front row seats held the leaders, Minister Scrimgeour and Mad-Eye Moody. They spoke in low tones about tactical arrangements and about suspected moles in the ministry before lapsing into silence. Scrimgeour watched Moody and wondered at the man who never seemed to rest. Even with his eyes closed, the magical eye rotated, sometimes lingering on Scrimgeour in a way that made him uneasy. He still had doubts about the operation, why the Order had chosen to reveal themselves now, how Dumbledore had learned of a Death Eater presence in New York, and of a plan to strike Potter, who Dumbledore's spy was, whether there was a spy of Voldemort's inside the Ministry, and why so many key figures were converging on New York. By evening, the city unfurled beneath them, a web of lights and highways. Street lamps and traffic glowed like veins, waiting to catch the steel bird as it descended. This was the city where the magical Congress met, and this was where the Death Eaters were. The plane dropped below the clouds, and the sky closed over. The cabin dimmed. Outside the terminal windows, the world blurred in a veil of rain. The New York airport glowed through it like a giant candelabrum. Lucius inhaled the damp air and watched the puddled tarmac through the floor-to-ceiling glass. He still wore a cloak and hood and the customary mask, the Death Eater uniform, but it did little for the bulky figure beside him, Elder Goyle. When Crabbe had been with them, the disguise had had some effect. Without him, it meant almost nothing. Crabbe's escape had caused a fuss. Voldemort had tormented the guards with the Cruciatus, but the operation had continued regardless. Lucius made himself appear indifferent as he glanced at the pale, snake-faced man ahead of him. He could feel the hold the Dark Lord once had on his followers beginning to slip. The plane's engines roared, prop wash whipping the rain into a furious sheet. The aircraft taxied, came to a halt, and the cabin and cockpit lights went out. For a moment, the whole airport seemed to be reduced to wind and rain and a stretched silence. Harry Potter stepped down the gangway and felt cold raindrops sting his face. The Aurors and members of the Order flanked him in silence, the atmosphere charged and oppressive. From somewhere beyond the runway, a hissing voice slid across the rain like a snake. "Welcome, Harry Potter." "Lord Voldemort," Harry answered, voice thin with damp and tension. He gripped his wand in a way that eased the tautness in his shoulders, a familiar, pointed calm, the same focus he felt before a Quidditch match. The Death Eaters stood farther along the runway, cloaks soaked and clinging like shrouds. The rain seemed to part around the pale figure in front. His robe didn't hide his face. Scarred and noseless, his lips pulled into a smile that was all contempt. "Just yesterday, one of my servants escaped," Voldemort said. His lipless mouth twisted. "I thought the message he carried would send you scurrying back into the cradle Dumbledore has kept you in, as on that night 16 years ago." Harry felt anger, but it sharpened him rather than clouding him. "After that Easter night, I thought Dumbledore and Loren would send you hiding back in the Albanian forests, as you were from that night until 3 years ago." 16 years ago? 16 years ago," Voldemort murmured, and a ghostly green light gleamed in his eyes. "I hope you're lucky enough to survive tonight. I'm sorry you have no relatives left to trade for you." "But we're here tonight, Voldemort. The Ministry will arrest you." Scrimgeour stepped forward then, his slight limp making his movement seem eager and brittle. At his signal, Aurors and Order members raised their wands in one motion. Color erupted down the runway, red, blue, silver, spells crowding the air. Expelliarmus, Knockback Jinx, Stupefy, Diffindo. For an instant, the rain flashed with a riot of light. Voldemort's smile shifted into amusement. He flicked his wand, and a shimmering silver shield blossomed before him. Every spell exploded against it in a muted chorus, each impact sending a chilling tremor through the air. The shield's glow painted Voldemort's face, the vertical scarlet pupils, the slit nostrils, the grin that was less human than malice made flesh. Scrimgeour tried to marshal his men to press their advantage, but Voldemort raised his wand again, not at the Aurors, but at the sky. The silver shield flared, then became a wash of green flames that burned through the rain and turned it into mist. In that pale vapor, a sickly glow traced the contours of a giant skull and serpent, the Dark Mark, suspended over the field and pressing like a weight on everyone's chest. Harry watched Voldemort's movements closely. When the dark mark finished forming, Voldemort kept his wand raised and spoke in a soft, terrible voice. Avada Kedavra. The mark broke apart into clusters of phosphorescent light that fell from the mist like shards of green lightning, each one humming with lethal intent. The scene froze the breath in everyone's lungs. Mad-Eye Moody bellowed, "Cover! Get down!" The Order and the Aurors scattered for whatever cover they could find. Rain fell hard on Harry's shoulders, but he kept his eyes fixed on Voldemort and the wand in his hand. It was a plain wand, knobby and old-looking, carved and oiled, yet the green light that bloomed from it was pure, biting evil. Even with others screaming and ducking, Harry didn't feel the same blind fear as them. When someone faces death often enough, familiarity brings a strange steadiness. He did what he had trained for most. "Expelliarmus," he shouted. A red bolt leapt from his wand and collided with Voldemort's green beam. For a breathless instant, they locked, green and red, each refusing to yield. The dark mark over the runway seemed to shudder and lose cohesion. The Avada Kedavra flames that had been hung above them faltered and began to fall, turning into dripping green sparks that burned anything they touched. The green light crept forward around the red inch by inch, and the standoff shifted in Voldemort's favor. Around them, the combat became a tangle. Aurors and Death Eaters clashed in circuits across the field. Raindrops hissed and broke in the green fire. One water ant that touched it flared and vanished in a curling wisp of light. Harry and Voldemort remained locked, as if something invisible kept forcing the deadly beams away from each other's faces. It was a stalemate that felt like a held breath before a plunge. The battlefield divided. By the right engine of the plane, Lucius Malfoy watched Rufus Scrimgeour with narrowed eyes. "Rufus," Lucius said flatly, "you're old. Your legs aren't steady. Why not stand down?" "You're old too. Why not spend your days in Azkaban?" Scrimgeour snapped. "I thought about it," Lucius admitted. 3 days in Azkaban made me give up the idea. The Dementors would drive a man mad, worse than death." His voice hardened. "You're the one who makes the rules now. Perhaps you should try them." "The rules have changed." "Changed?" A green flame landed by Scrimgeour's foot, and he leapt back. Lucius didn't press an attack. Something about the exchange felt wrong to him, but he couldn't say what. He continued anyway. "Azkaban's under the Dementors now. A prison the Ministry itself established. Surrender, and I'll propose a reduction at the tribunal." "I've had enough of prisons," Scrimgeour said. "Those who are locked away for freedom's sake." He didn't finish the sentence before Lucius' wand was up, and a dazzling light burst from its tip. Scrimgeour responded immediately. Under the spellwork, the rain steamed into a thick white fog that hid them for a moment. Under the tail of the plane, Professor McGonagall twisted and turned, casting and dodging. She transfigured blades of wet grass into snarling tiger and leopard puppets, whose fangs and claws lashed at the Death Eaters pressing in. Selwyn, Goyle, Mulciber, and for a time she held them at bay. Avery crept in for an ambush, thinking to take advantage of her focus. But as he passed beneath the gangway, Mad-Eye Moody lunged, his wooden leg flicked up in a brutal kick. Avery went sprawling, his wand kicked out of his hand, and a well-timed stupefy knocked him senseless. "Remember to always be vigilant," Moody muttered, his magical eye spinning as he scanned for the next threat and moved off to meet it. Beneath the wing, Kingsley Shacklebolt stalked Corbin Yaxley like a hunter. Years had dulled Yaxley. He fought with the braggadocio of the past, but lacked the edge. Kingsley tightened the pressure, waiting for a mistake. In the shadow of the cabin door, Antonin Dolohov crouched, wand leveled, calculating the green flash that would end the auror. Just as he drew breath to cast, a blinding red light struck him. "Expelliarmus!" and his wand flew free. Dolohov's head snapped up. 2 familiar faces filled his vision, one with a small braid and an earring, the other shorter, sturdier, freckled, and with an old burn scar on his forearm. They moved like a pair of dogs on command. A fist found Dolohov's jaw with a thud, and he saw stars. "I surrender! I surrender!" he babbled, dizzy. "I'll stand trial. I was under the Imperius. They forced me." "You're Antonin Dolohov, right?" the taller one demanded. "That's right," Dolohov wheezed. He was tough in appearance, but showed no backbone. Before he could say more, a knee shattered his words. He doubled over in agony as punches and kicks rained down. The 2 brothers, Bill with his earring, Charlie with broad shoulders, worked him over until he could barely think. Their voices exchanged as they fought. "Did you eat, Bill? Hit harder." "You think everyone's like you, barbaric dragon keeper Charlie? Make sure he can't show up at a tribunal. If Mum's pleased, maybe she won't mind us stepping out on our own. That awful man, he killed 2 uncles." At the edge of the tarmac, spells streaked and hissed. 4 Death Eaters tried to hold their ground, but found themselves pushed back, pressed toward the perimeter wall. They were 2 sets of relatives, the Lestrange brothers, Rodolphus and Rabistan, faces carved with hatred, and the Caro siblings, Alecto and Amicus, hurling shield charms without ceasing. Remus Lupin, Sirius Black, and Nymphadora Tonks pressed them, determined and coordinated. For a few brief moments, the 3 of them bantered like family at dinner rather than fighters at war. "We're getting close to the wall," Lupin warned without looking away. "Watch their counterattack, especially the Lestranges. The whole family's mad." "Believe me," Sirius said, "no one knows that better than I do. My sister married into that lot." "And my aunt," Tonks added. "Remus, since you and Tonks are together now, what should we call you?" Sirius teased. "Shut up!" Tonks snapped, but her grin betrayed her. They tightened the noose. In the lull between spells, the Lestranges shoved the Caros forward like shields. As Alecto and Amicus took the brunt of incoming spells, Rodolphus and Rabistan unleashed their most vicious curse. "Crucio!" 2 red lights struck Lupin and Sirius. Tonks moved, blocking the curse that had aimed for Remus. Lupin didn't spare a glance at Sirius at first. He drove several stupefies into his attackers in quick succession, each blast neat and accurate, clearing the threat. Then he turned to check on Sirius. When the Crucio hit, Sirius's eyes had widened and his cloak and hat had shaken as if in terrible pain. Then they settled, and smoke curled up from them, blue and iridescent. In that drifting haze, someone had sprayed a mocking graffiti of Peeves with his tongue sticking out. "I suppose the smoke is to cover a retreat," Peeves, or rather the drawing in smoke, seemed to jeer. Lupin stared for a second, speechless. "Couldn't it be something more dignified, like the Ministry crest or Hogwarts emblem?" Tonks shrugged. "George and Fred said the Ministry's rates were too low. They called the discount advertising." "I'm definitely complaining to them when this is over," Lupin muttered. Sirius coughed and waved his hands until the smoke thinned, his voice rough from the spell's effects, but a grin already starting at the corner of his mouth. 7:52. The sun is shining brightly. Wizards in the Leaky Cauldron like to say, "You'll never catch a member of the House of Malfoy at a crime scene, even if the wand used is covered in their fingerprints." Lucius Malfoy always thought the saying missed the point. They would never leave a wand smeared with their prints in the first place. If the Aurors were clever enough, they might find galleons stamped with Malfoy marks on the culprit or in their home. But what would that prove? Most galleons in England had flowed through the vaults of the House of Malfoy. Most ministry officials held coins that bore the family's trace. Since Armand Malfoy came to Britain and won the trust of King William Poor, using the royal grant to build the Wiltshire Manor, the Malfoys had lived on that land for 10 centuries. Their wealth shaped the wizarding landscape. For long stretches, the Malfoys bridged both Muggle and wizarding worlds. They sold pure-blood superiority to like-minded wizards and displayed the glamour of magic to Muggles. By exerting influence over the powerful on both sides, they steadily gathered wealth and territory, absorbing neighboring Muggle lands, expanding their manor, investing in Muggle currency and assets, and became one of Britain's richest wizarding families. Noble titles were within reach. One Malfoy even nearly married Elizabeth I, though it came to nothing. When the first drafts of the Statute of Secrecy were discussed, the House objected fiercely. The family tree contained many half-bloods and even a squib who'd done very well in Muggle life. But by 1692, when the International Confederation's Statute of Secrecy was enacted, the Malfoys severed their Muggle ties and loudly adopted pure-blood rhetoric. From then on, they moved to influence the newly formed Ministry of Magic from the shadows. The Malfoys never wanted the minister's chair. They preferred to be the power behind the throne, safe from blame when things went wrong. Though no Malfoy had ever served as minister, the family played decisive roles in almost every ministerial election, funding pliant candidates, sabotaging opponents, spreading rumors. Their hand had shown itself throughout history. In the 14th century, Nicholas Malfoy used the plague as cover to exterminate Muggle tenants who angered him and slipped past the Wizard Council's judgment. In the late 18th century, Septimus Malfoy bent a ministerial election to the family's will. Many believed the then minister, Ancus Osbert, was merely Septimus's puppet. 30 years ago, Abraxas Malfoy, Lucius's father, was suspected of conspiring to murder Minister Nobby Leach, the first Muggle-born minister, leading to Leach's resignation on grounds of ill health. Lucius grew up in the glow of those triumphs. He took his father's lessons to heart: enter Hogwarts to expand family power and fortune. He was sorted into Slytherin then, after graduation, became a core Death Eater. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, he used family money and connections to help Voldemort rise, and in turn rode Voldemort's ascent to greater wealth. In the summer of 1980, Lucius welcomed his son. Everything seemed perfect, like the lucky dream Felix Felicis grants. He expected to rival or eclipse his illustrious ancestors, to make the Malfoy name a source of pride for generations. Then, in a single year, the dream crumbled. Voldemort's sudden fall upended the wizarding world. Lucius faced ministry investigation and asset seizures. He leaned on the family's influence, blaming Imperius as cover, bribed his way out of trial, and watched his fortune shrink. Worse, Dumbledore turned his attention to the Malfoys. Lucius could no longer rig ministerial elections. New officials, hostile to the Death Eaters, were unwilling to deal with his house. He withdrew from public life, fading from power, until Voldemort's return, when the old nightmare returned. Charms streaked across the tarmac and green flames licked the puddles. A touch of that faintly malevolent fire withered moss, sprouting from cracks, and sent water skimmers fleeing. For most adult wizards, the scattered spells and the creeping flames weren't aimed at them. Lucius, benefiting from a life of privilege, had been an indifferent practitioner at Hogwarts. He had joined the Death Eaters, but rarely fought. He was untrained in wand duels. After Voldemort's fall, he'd toyed with dark arts objects and cursed items, but middle age and laziness conspired against him. When the Ministry later asked, he sold those items to Borgin and Burkes. He could plot and scheme, but in a straight wand duel, he wouldn't even match an Auror trainee. Lucius suspected the Malfoy line simply lacked talent for the practicalities of combat. As the melee threatened to erupt, other Death Eaters surged forward. Lucius edged away from the center of the fighting, avoiding attention and circling toward the terminal exit. After a few minutes of skirmishing around Scrimgeour, the battlefield filled with mist and ghostly flames. Visibility shrank, and the limping minister soon lost track of his targets, getting tangled among fleeing Death Eaters. Lucius worried about running into Aurors and pushed on, frowning at arrowed signs and corridor maps. Muggle airports were annoyingly clear about exits. He threaded between marble pillars and hastened down the hall. A few minutes later, two Death Eaters rounded the same corner and collided in fate. Both were smart. The exit was almost within reach. Escape meant freedom from both Voldemort and the Aurors. Neither spoke. They averted their gazes, clutched their wands, and jogged faster toward the open doors. Then a clear female voice cut the air. Sliding plane. Shifting slab. Two spells in rapid succession left them no time to react. The corridor beneath their feet became a smooth slope. Momentum carried them forward. They slid, tumbled twice, and crashed into a stone slab that had once been a glass door. Limbs splayed, heads askew, eyes closed. Lucius heard hurried footsteps and the distinct voices of an Auror team nearby. He gave up struggling and began composing how he might explain himself before an American Magical Congress court. A familiar voice followed the spells. Loren and Hermione looked down at the prone Death Eaters. Because pureblood families had intermarried for generations, the Malfoys' features tended to repeat. Platinum hair, sharp brows, and those traits were unmistakable. An American Magical Congress Auror squad had disarmed the pair and began to bind them, but Loren raised a hand. "This one doesn't need to be detained," he said. "He's on our side." Pickley hesitated, then his face cleared with sudden comprehension. He motioned for the others to take Lucius away and leave the infiltrator among the captured. "No wonder you had intelligence on the Death Eaters. No wonder you could set this ambush and knew their movements. I thought it was only old Crab. You British wizards are something else. It was awkward to explain, so Loren only smiled and said, "It's all Dumbledore's plan." Pickley and Nancy blinked, their admiration for the amiable headmaster deepening. Hermione glanced at Loren. The witch who had felled 2 Death Eaters with a few brisk spells wore a complicated expression. From the direction of the tarmac, a glass-shattering sound rose above the general chaos. The fighting there grew more distinct, the screams of witches, Moody's shouted warnings, the rumble underfoot. "Harry's in trouble out there," someone said. Pickley snapped back to attention and demanded, "We were ordered not to interfere with your fight. Where are you and Headmaster Dumbledore? Why haven't you acted?" Loren's eyes drifted to the center of the battlefield. "We're waiting for the right moment." "What moment?" "The moment Harry dies." Across the tarmac, the emerald flames dimmed in scattered patches, an indication that their casters had turned their full attention to the duel. Brilliant light flared at the center, spells from both sides painting the rain-slashed night. Long shadows stretched behind Harry and Lord Voldemort. Their faces were fierce and unyielding. Harry stared into those red-lidded eyes, then watched the junction of green and red light. The tableau was almost beautiful, a cold, brilliant aurora over a wet runway, the 2 archenemies locked in lethal balance. Even faced with imminent death, Harry found his fear only beginning to bloom. The falling rain felt colder, the green of Avada Kedavra brighter. He expected to be brave, he did not expect his heart to beat faster. Opposite him, the mouth on the pale face curled into a sneer, a flash of green light, and everything went black. "Harry!" Sirius cried from the crowd. He had been warned, had been prepared, yet watching Harry's body drop still stole soundlessly from him the ability to breathe. More than a decade of hope and dread had not lessened the pain of this moment. Voldemort withdrew his magic from his body and let the rain wash over him like relief. He stared down at Harry's fallen figure and mouthed part of the prophecy with a soft, triumphant cadence. "One must die at the hand of the other, for neither can live while the other survives." Then he stopped. An odd palpitation ran through him. His skin prickled and seemed to ripple into snake-like patterns. He turned, uneasy, searching the crowd, his Death Eaters retreating, Aurors backing away, the Order of the Phoenix scattering. Aurors who were dragging unconscious Death Eaters lagged behind, unsettled. Scrimgeour, limping, and Mad-Eye Moody, hobbling, supported each other as they fell back. What were they afraid of? What were they avoiding? As his gaze shifted, flames shot up from the flat ground not far away, brief flares that blinked out and in their vanishing took Harry's body with them. The drizzle seemed suddenly to stop, the cold drops gone. Visibility sharpened. Voldemort did not immediately register the change. The prickling in his veins felt eerily familiar, something like what he had felt 4 months earlier at Easter. Panic edged into his wide eyes. The sky above seared as if struck by a miniature sun. The rain, when it fell, instantly vaporized on contact with the roaring heat. A halo, like a bruised rainbow, rimmed that blinding center. The air was pocked with greenish-black holes. Temperature climbed relentlessly. Puddles dried, mist burned away. Wizards on the perimeter recoiled in horror. The asphalt on the tarmac softened, then flowed, covering the ground. Terminal glass liquefied into streams of molten, mirror-bright metal. It was as if hell itself had broken through to Earth. Voldemort's robes, damp moments ago, were now crisp. The heat made air convect and howl, gusts slapped at his robes, and faint smoke licked at the fabric. Magic thrummed from within him, as though it were the only barrier keeping him from being consumed. He hissed to himself, manic and defiant. "I have killed my enemy. I will not, be undone by the same spell." He didn't apparate. He brought his wand up and aimed it at the blazing sun in the sky, at Loren. As both sides prepared to cast, a gravely familiar voice came from behind him. In the corner of his eye, he glimpsed a colossal figure, skin scorched and cracked, blood and sweat darkening him, singed clothing smoking, charging forward like some furious bear, old Crab, humble servant and blunt instrument, barreling into the inferno. A streak of green light flashed. The burly, middle-aged man's eyes went glassy. He still had his hands raised, as if lunging, his legs kicked out, but his body hung limp in midair, a corpse suspended by inertia. That weight carried him into Lord Voldemort, the blunt physical impact ripping through the Dark Lord's long-prepared spell. Voldemort staggered. Shame and rage flickered across his face, nearly unhinging him. But at the razor's edge of life and death, he forced himself to endure. He ignored the fallen creature's bloodied hands clamped at his waist and looked up. A young wizard floated above, wand outstretched toward the ground, an unusually long wand. A broad band of golden rainbow light blazed from its tip, scorching the air with unimaginable heat. Thick clouds crowded the night sky, and the drizzle hissed away, evaporating before it could touch the light. The brilliant arc of color plunged downward like a fallen sun. There was nowhere to apparat. The blockade still held. Voldemort had no place to hide, and his interrupted counterattack hadn't finished. He conjured, at the last breath, only a flash of silver shield. Then the sky itself seemed to be swallowed by magic. Half a dazzling sun slammed down, and searing flames swept over everything beyond the silver ward. Voldemort's pale cheeks flushed raw. He heard Old Crabbe's remains crackling as the heat consumed them. His face snarled, but he kept his wand aloft, making the shield flare blindingly bright. The flames lashed the silver barrier with a thunderous roar. Enormous power poured into the ward. The metal shivered and then radiated even more fiercely. The rainbow fire was magnificent and terrible, as if a star had come crashing down. The temperature rose until the ground liquefied into rivers of molten stone. The air thinned, and every inch of exposed skin felt like it was being burned away. Blood in his veins surged and boiled. A searing agony gripped his heart. Time stretched and collapsed. What felt like an age, and yet only seconds passed. When the pain reached a breaking point, his senses dulled. The figure beyond the rainbow light blurred. The worst of the burn eased into a humming, and all he heard was the hiss of superheated air and a choking, acrid stench at his nostrils. The smell of death. Voldemort's snake eyes widened, then narrowed to slits. He snapped awake. "Loren Morgan," he screamed. The thin air distorted the sound. The cry came out keening and sharp, nearly ripping the fabric of space as it struck the young wizard. The Dark Lord's face was already scorched, blackened in places, in others raw and bleeding. Keeping that vast power pressed against the silver shield made the metal tremble until the noise was piercing. Voldemort's elongated pupils rolled up. Anger and defiance drained from his serpent features, replaced by a hollow, stunned look. The whole body seemed to fracture. Tiny fissures spidered outward from his mouth and nose. A faint black smoke seeped from the cracks, mingling with the breath, shaping itself vaguely into another face. It was the first sign, a shade trying to abandon its body and escape on its own. Voldemort's shade was not like the ghosts at Hogwarts, nor like the shades called up by the Resurrection Stone. Horcruxes still tethered his soul in ways that made him different, and, for all their malevolence, they were what allowed his presence to persist in the real world. But he had never expected all 7 Horcruxes to be destroyed. Without those indestructible soul links, his main soul no longer had the right to roam. Loren needn't hurry. He calmly steered the rainbow light down, gradually overwhelming the silver ward. Wisps of black smoke issued from Voldemort's mouth, nostrils, ears, and eyes, but they could not escape. They pooled and coalesced over the pale reptilian face like an evil mask. The two voices, the smoky shade and the man's own throat, overlapped, echoed together. "Damn you, Morgan! Dumbledore's hypocrite! Do you think killing me counts as victory?" A voice hissed, raw with fury. "You'll regret it. Slytherin has foreseen it." Silvery cracks spidered through the ward. A few seconds later, with a sound like breaking metal, it shattered. The overwhelming rainbow flame engulfed Voldemort. In an instant, his perfect, resurrected body burst into fire. Skin, muscle, blood vessels, organs, even bone flamed and charred. Flesh carbonized before it could smoke. Hot wind ripped across the tarmac. What had been a man turned to sparks and ashes. The light dimmed. Where the young wizard had been hovering, there was nothing to be seen. The rain returned, a cold, drizzling fall that wrapped the airport in damp quiet. The rain doused the smoldering ground. Wind cooled, and the cracked earth knit itself back together. Molten concrete reformed into solid lanes, obsidian that had flowed like liquid cooled into glass and walls. The American Aurors looked on, stunned. Scrimgeour stared at the restored terminal as if still not believing his senses. "Dumbledore," he whispered. The image of the rainbow light, the sun-like blaze, the heat that had nearly made the world a furnace, replayed in his mind. The Dark Lord, the man who had once choked the ministry itself, and the indestructible silver shield that had stood against dozens of spells, all undone in a single burning instant. As the light fell, the shield shattered, and you-know-who, the one who had eluded death, was reduced to ash and scattered into the night. Only a cool, ordinary airport remained, and dozens of British wizards, who had known Voldemort's terror for decades, looking as if waking from a long nightmare. A roar of jubilation broke out from his colleagues like an avalanche. They ignored the bound, unconscious Death Eaters at their feet and embraced one another, shouting and cheering. 16 years after the first fall, they had known the thrill of Voldemort's downfall again. The sound of celebration mixed with the gentle rain and left Scrimgeour a little dizzy. He felt someone approach and turned to find Samuel G. Quirrell, head of the American Magical Congress's delegation for the operation, standing next to him. Quirrell, a powerful figure and a candidate for the next presidency of the Congress, looked equally dazed as he studied the repaired scene. "Are all your wizarding duels like this?" he asked softly. "This wasn't an ordinary duel," Scrimgeour replied. "To be honest," Quirrell went on with a teasing grin, "I never understood your ministry's distrust of Dumbledore. Excluding his reputation at the International Confederation, well, now I get it. If a wizard like him had been in my country, I wouldn't sleep easy either." Scrimgeour blinked. "We don't distrust Dumbledore. He has run his school faithfully all these years. No political ambitions, no actions against the ministry." "You mean Dumbledore is old?" Quirrell's smile turned impish. "If I'm not mistaken, the one who fought you-know-who just now was a young wizard," Quirrell added. "After tonight, the ministry will live in fear again for quite some time. I'd say 100 years. Scrimgeour's face went hard. The terminal corridor glowed under bright lights. Rain tracked in streams down the floor-to-ceiling windows. Loren sat on a VIP lounge chair. The headlights of distant emergency vehicles blinked on the tarmac, and the airport had been brought back to order. Passengers and staff, escorted into safe rooms by American aurors, were returning to their places. Some of the more perceptive muggles had had their memories gently altered. The aurors hoped they wouldn't be affected long-term. Voldemort was gone. Many Death Eaters captured. The magical world might finally enter a time of peaceful rebuilding. Yet watching the aurors celebrating with boxed beers among the ordinary people, Loren felt a strange dissonance, a familiar world suddenly unfamiliar. He thought back 6 years, to the mountain ranch in summer when Professor McGonagall had first delivered his Hogwarts letter. He had known early that Voldemort would be resurrected, that the Death Eaters would stir, that all of the Dark Lord's Horcruxes would be destroyed, and that, by Dumbledore's plan, the final death would come. The battle at Hogwarts, where almost everyone had taken part, had seemed to mark peace. But the last fight had not been in Britain, not at Hogwarts, and not at the Ministry. For reasons still strange to him, it had been staged at a New York airport. The thought left him bemused. "What's the great hero thinking about, sitting here alone?" a familiar voice said from beside him. A soft scent came with it, and Loren's numbness dissolved into a smile. "Weren't you listening in on extradition talks between the Ministry and the Congress? How did you get here?" he asked. Eavesdropping was pointless. There wasn't much to dispute, she said as she sat down, her shoulder against his. "Is Voldemort really gone? He won't resurface somewhere, will he?" "I think he's gone. And Harry, how is he?" "Fawkes took him away. He should be unconscious on a bed somewhere, talking with his mother." "Mrs. Potter?" Harry was struck by Avada Kedavra. Between life and death, he saw an illusion, his mother. Loren's voice softened. "Oh." Hermione tilted her head, peering at him as if trying to read his thoughts in his eyes, which reflected the lights beyond the glass. "You still didn't answer my question. What were you thinking about earlier? You looked like you had something on your mind." "Just something small. I haven't worked out how to say it yet." "Then tell me when you do." Loren laced their fingers together and stared out at the night. The world felt peaceful and one, and yet he knew history's cycles. Calm would be followed by new crises. He'd once assumed those were the concerns of Dumbledore and the others, or of the prophesied, like Harry. Now, with Voldemort's matter resolved, the more distant future seemed like a responsibility that might fall to him. A strange trace of regret flickered through him at the idea that the Dark Lord's story had ended without further need for vengeance. Somewhere far above, a thunderbird burst through the cloud cover, enormous wings beating as it turned and plunged back into the sea of vapor. It was the thunderbird the American Magical Congress had summoned. Tonight's rain had been partly its doing. As the thunderbird flew away, the clouds broke and the drizzle finally eased. On a nearby rooftop, an older man with a grizzled beard watched the bird go. He bore a passing resemblance to Rolf, and a smile creased his face. Beside him, Nidander, the Congress's magizoologist, shrugged. "Nidander, are you sure? Absolutely sure no one saw a white basilisk?" the older man asked. "I'm sure." Nidander looked helpless. He was liaison to Newt Scamander. No one at the Congress could command a thunderbird the way Newt could. "What a pity," Newt said with a small, disappointed frown. He'd been hoping to witness a basilisk tonight. He'd brought an extra supply of mandrakes just in case. Now he would have to submit the receipts to the Congress as thunderbird food. Those at headquarters wouldn't understand thunderbirds anyway. Night deepened. Only a few hours remained until dawn. Loren stretched and yawned. "They're probably still busy," he said. "I'm tired. Let's find somewhere to sleep." Hermione met his eyes, serene. "Back to Ilvermorny? It's late. I don't want to climb a mountain." "You don't have to climb. The apparition blockade won't stop you." "I don't follow." He took her hand and they left. Outside the airport were plenty of hotels. They picked one with an elegant sign, bright lights, and a small fountain at the entrance. The lobby was warm. The front desk staff were all nicely uniformed women with golden hair. Loren didn't glance sideways. "How can I help you?" the clerk asked. "Any rooms available?" he said. "Yes. What kind of room would you like?" "A couple's suite." "Very good. Here are your key cards." Hermione looked at Loren. He pursed his lips, but couldn't help a satisfied little grin as he cleared his throat. "It's late. One room's easier than two. Saves money, too." "I don't think so," she said, rolling her eyes, and led the way to the elevator. 754. Conversation in a Hazy Fantasy. A new day was about to dawn. On the open-air platform of a tall building next to the airport, a strangely dressed, middle-aged witch sat suspended in the air, her legs dangling, half of her body leaning 100 meters above the ground, staring toward the airport. One of her hands was pale as jade, and beside her lay a wand with a phoenix feather core. The closed airport had reopened. Streetlights and billboards threw colorful light, and the headlights of passing vehicles dragged streaks of brightness, weaving into a magnificent, dazzling web when seen from a distance. The sky above the airport was clear of clouds, and the moonlight slanted down like faint frost on the ground and glass facades. Bellatrix rarely watched Muggles closely. She barely spared them a glance. Her sister Andromeda had been disowned by the family for marrying a Muggle. Now, though, she could no longer tell Muggle from pure blood at a glance. That changed when she had been in Azkaban. Besides the Dementors, Azkaban was filled with criminals broken beyond recognition. Only occasionally, every few months, could prisoners see the roving wizard guards. In the brief moments without the Dementors, those prisoners who kept any sanity gathered by the rocky shore and stared out at the distance, hoping to see something alive, something with life. The ocean then seemed boundless, like the sky. Sometimes she felt the sky and ocean were actually connected. On such days, a ferry would pass slowly, Muggles' big steel ships, sometimes passenger, mostly cargo. When weather was good, crew and passengers stood on deck, chatting and laughing, sailing slowly toward a land they couldn't see. Those despicable Muggles breathed the air of freedom, while pure-blood prisoners silently awaited death. Two faint tremors split the air, and two figures appeared behind the witch, their wand tips aimed directly at her heart. "Bellatrix, put down your weapon. Give up your resistance and come with us to the Ministry of Magic to stand trial and atone for your crimes," said Rita Skeeter sharply, though she stepped instinctively back and hid behind the member of the Order of the Phoenix beside her. "You know who has been completely eliminated, and all Death Eaters have been arrested. You're not stupid. Don't try to resist. Hand over your wand and cooperate. I have a good relationship with Dumbledore. When we get back to the Ministry, I can plead with the Wizengamot to reduce your sentence appropriately. Don't make the wrong choice. Don't think there are only two of us, and we can't handle you. There are aurors from the ministry and representatives from the American Magical Congress nearby. The moment you resist, I'll notify them, and they aren't as easy to deal with as I am." Bellatrix's mouth curved into a cold, mocking smile. "You still won't say his name." Rita wasn't provoked. "I don't not say it out of fear. It's just a habit I picked up long ago. I've been moving among you since you went into hiding at Easter. He didn't even discover me, did he? What Dark Lord, what Lord? Voldemort was defeated, and not just once. When I go back to Britain, I'll write a detailed book about him." Bellatrix's eyes went cold as she slowly looked at the witch beside Rita. Her age was indeterminate. Her face seemed about 30, but her eyes had the weathered look of someone 70 or 80. She gave off a strange aura, not so much wizardly as animal-like, like a python. Bellatrix narrowed her eyes with a hint of regret. "If my master had met you earlier, he would have been pleased." The witch beside Rita, Nagini, frowned, a faint glow on her wand as she leveled it at Bellatrix. "Bellatrix, your master has been vanquished. Your comrades have surrendered. Give up your resistance." Bellatrix tilted her head and reached for the wand beside her. The two newcomers tightened their grips and braced, but Bellatrix suddenly dropped and plummeted. "Bella!" Rita rushed forward. Nagini was quicker. In a blink, she was at the railing. She grabbed it with one hand, twisted, and a long scaled tail whipped out, hooked the falling Bellatrix, and coiled around her. With a squeeze, Bellatrix was rendered unconscious and was flung back onto the rooftop. The body hit with a dull thud. Rita blinked, looked at the unconscious Death Eater, then at Nagini. The tail slid back into Nagini's skirt. Her eyes were calm, but she seemed slightly stunned. "You're an animagus? How can you transform like this? Why didn't you say so before?" Nagini lowered her gaze, sweeping it over Bellatrix's abdomen, and sighed almost imperceptibly, her expression complex. Perhaps a long time passed, or perhaps none at all. Harry's consciousness rose out of chaos, and he slowly opened his eyes. He lay in a bright silver mist, steam-like, also like the glow of a Patronus, faintly luminous. Everything around him was silver mist. The ground beneath him was the same, neither warm nor cold, neither soft nor hard. He had seen this before. It wasn't truly real, but a place between illusion and reality, between life and death. Limbo. Harry remembered his mother's old promise, and pieces fell into place. He sat up and checked his limbs, intact. His senses worked. He felt embarrassment at being naked, and at once a set of wizard robes appeared, and he put them on. He stood and began to explore. Wherever his gaze rested, the silver mist condensed into scenery. Sunlight spilled in, the ground solidified, and a bright, clean space took shape. The eerie silence was broken by faint sounds, strange thumps, and soft whimpers. Following the sounds, Harry found a naked child huddled under a seat. Its skin was rough and red, as if peeled, curled up, and trembling. It was small and fragile. He should have felt pity, but a visceral revulsion rose in him. "Stay away from him," a gentle voice answered. Lily Potter walked toward him, smiling, her steps light, wearing a flowing dress. "Harry, my brave, wonderful child." She opened her arms. Her body was solid. She showed no transparency. "I told you we'd meet again." Harry paused, then sprang forward for his mother's real, warm embrace, and tears welled in his eyes. Lily stroked his back gently as if comforting an infant. I told you. Am I dead?" he asked. "I don't think so, my dear son. There are still things I don't understand. That can wait until you wake and ask Headmaster Dumbledore. Now come, let's go. We'll see your father." They walked away from the whimpering red-skinned child. Their voices faded as they drifted into the silver mist, and the illusion Harry's soul had built began to dissipate. The mist swallowed the sunlight, the solid seats blurred, and the small creature's cries dwindled. Just as the mist was about to close over it, another figure entered. Dumbledore, in a flowing dark blue robe, looked around with curious eyes and muttered softly as if to Fawkes. This is not the adventure I expected. We are not truly dead. We are only passing through." He observed the thing under the seat, an abandoned child whose skin had been torn by a bitter cold, flesh exposed and bleeding. The creature shivered and coughed. Dumbledore's deep blue eyes were bright and inscrutable, showing no pity. He sat beside the seat, and the silver mist around them flowed like a stream, as if the whole world had shrunk to that small patch. From his robe, he drew a small black gem engraved with a symmetrical, strange symbol, a triangle, a circle, and a vertical line with a hairline crack through it. He placed the gem on the red-skinned child's forehead. An odd surge of magic rose, the calm mist roiled, and a keening wind blew, like a brewing storm or wailing ghosts. Time had no meaning here. After a while, a dark blue phantom emerged from the mist, circled the seat, and slipped into the child's body. Dumbledore made no motion but watched, pushing up his half-moon spectacles and stroking his beard. One by one, 7 wisps of mist entered the child, each phantom merging until the child grew inch by inch. When the last wisp merged, the child had transformed into an adult, Tom Riddle. The face was not the smooth, handsome face of his school days. The features seemed scalded and blurred, the whites of the eyes bloodshot and snake-like, his skin pale. He was wrapped in a black cloak. Dumbledore remained composed, unsurprised. "Good evening, Tom. Sit down." "Dumbledore." Lord Voldemort stared at him with cold intensity. Cracks ran across the fragile body, which was only a temporary aggregation of soul fragments liable to fall apart. Sounds came from him, hissing, whimpering, cries layered together. "Are you dead too?" "I don't think so," Dumbledore said gently. "I am merely taking advantage of the Phoenix's wondrous magic and Harry's peculiar soul state to pay a short visit." A faint red light flashed in Voldemort's eyes. "Why am I here? Perhaps Loren's flames bear the magic of salvation, or the effects of your own dark arts altered things. Who knows?" Dumbledore smiled. "In any case, you are trapped here. You cannot go to the world of the dead, nor can you return fully to the living. Your eyes see nothing, your voice meets no reply, and this body is pieced together by the resurrection stone. Your soul will fragment, forever tormented by emptiness." Cracks webbed across Voldemort's form. The body that had been the red-skinned child flickered in and out. He fought to maintain composure, but the fury and hate flared through him, hissing and sorrow all at once. "Silence!" he barked, his voice layered, echoing as if several people spoke at once. He forced himself to stillness and fixed a sinister gaze on Dumbledore. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" "Having briefly experienced the death you feared most, I thought you might change," Dumbledore said. He watched the struggle quietly, almost indifferent. "Perhaps you will repent for your crimes and take remedial steps. You want to make a deal?" Voldemort's voice slowed and sharpened, as if the old omnipotent Dark Lord reappeared. "I'm already dead. What are you worried about? Or rather, what do you want? Tell me the memories you took from Slytherin, about the future, about prophecies." "What do I get?" Dumbledore considered, then answered solemnly. "In this endless void, before you sink completely, I can talk with you from time to time. Perhaps many would want to talk to you. I am not one of them." Voldemort's face was grim as he stared into Dumbledore's clear blue eyes, searching for weakness to exploit. "You worry about Mr. Morgan, the one who rose at the right moment. You wonder why Merlin and Morgan Le Fay chose him. You're curious what Slytherin left behind. You know what I want, too." Dumbledore's gaze did not waver. It was gentle, cold. Voldemort let out a cold laugh. "If you will not meet my terms, I'd rather you rot in regret. Perhaps we'll meet again then." Dumbledore peered through his spectacles a moment longer, then said calmly, "Then goodbye, Tom." Voldemort opened his mouth to speak, but Dumbledore flicked his sleeve. The wide motion swept across the fragile form. The phantoms and the child within disintegrated in an instant. The tranquil space grew tumultuous. The silver mist churned and the illusory realm shuddered. The phantoms released sobs, venomous curses and hysterical roars, a mournful, discordant chorus. Dumbledore did not look back. He stepped into the mist. Chapter 755, reviewed. Let's see if they can be released tomorrow morning. Sorrow? Soft light filled the suite. Loren lay on the bed, staring at the strip lights set into the hotel ceiling, clearing his mind to make room for imagination, while the steady sound of water running in the bathroom filled the room. He'd misjudged their choice of hotel. The bathroom was a separate, opaque room, not a glass-walled spa. He couldn't even see a shadow. If he'd thought to use a transfiguration to make a peephole in the wall, or a simple charm to turn concrete to glass, he might have caught a glimpse of a graceful figure moving in the steam. He stopped himself. It was late. It was dumb to invent spells for a moment like this. They'd already confessed to one another. If they wanted to be together, there was no need for tricks. Besides, the suite had only one bedroom. Tonight was still long, and the future was longer. The water stopped. Loren sat up, alert. For half a heartbeat, he wondered if some frightening bit of magic, something stronger than Imperio, had been used without him noticing. Then the water started up again. He exhaled and lay back down. The sound cut off once more, this time for good. He heard the bathroom door unlatch. Hermione emerged, wrapped in a large bath towel, hair piled into a loose bun with a few damp strands clinging to her neck. Droplets still beaded on the pale rounded planes of her shoulders and along the hollow of her collarbone. The towel hid everything it needed to, and left everything else unspoken. The soft sweep of her nightdress beneath, the faint pink on her cheeks from the heat. Up close, her face looked even softer. Long curled lashes, a small nose, thin, rose lips. Loren found himself dazed. Why hadn't he used those silly spells? After all? "What are you thinking about?" Hermione asked, trying for a calm tone, but glancing at him as she came closer. Their eyes met, her own darkened slightly, and her cheeks went redder. "I was thinking why I didn't turn the wall into glass," she admitted, rolling her eyes at him before easing into a smile. "It's late. Go take your bath." He rose and trudged to the bathroom. 10 minutes later, he returned. Hermione was half propped against the pillows, a small hotel brochure in her hands. She'd changed out of the towel into her own thin nightgown. The fabric was soft and delicate against her legs, clinging faintly at the waist. Loren sat and slipped an arm around her shoulders. "You're reading a brochure while your handsome boyfriend is in the bathroom?" he teased, frowning in mock sternness. Hermione lowered her eyes and pressed her lips together. The water had left her skin damp. The nightgown clung in places. "It's late. Let's sleep early. We have a busy day tomorrow. Between the Ministry and the Magical Congress, if we can get through that, there'll still be time to celebrate your birthday." "How about we sneak away in the morning?" Loren suggested. "You'll still have to be up early," she said. "No. Bed." Loren grinned and then more seriously asked, "Did you get me a present?" "Yes, I'll give it tomorrow." "What if I don't like it? Then you can give it back." "Can't you be nicer? Remember how I fussed over your birthday." Hermione fell silent. Given everything they were dealing with, she didn't press the argument. She finished the brochure, set it on the bedside table, and killed the strip lighting, leaving only the small bedside lamp glowing. "Go to sleep early. It's past midnight. I want to open my present now." Hermione looked suddenly flustered, tried to wriggle out of his arm, but he shifted so his hand came to rest around her neck, fingers entwining with damp strands of hair and brushing her ear. Their noses nearly touched. The lamp cast a warm pool of light, and the brochure lay open between them as they both leaned in to look at it. Images of mountains, plum blossoms, and bright lakes smiled back from the glossy pages. Close like that, in the soft summer heat, lightweight clothes transferring warmth without restraint, the small intimacy of two people leaning over the same paper felt like a promise. Loren's hand found hers on the brochure. It was a gentle thing at first, thumbs brushing fingertips, then a little firmer as he traced a picture of a delicate pendant she'd once worn, a tiny whale carved on a chain. The image made them both smile and lowered the last of Hermione's defenses. When his hand moved with more intent, Hermione caught her breath and pressed a palm against his chest. "Stop," she whispered. Loren paused then, with a mischievous look, bent his head to whisper something in her ear. Hermione's cheeks went pink. She knew she'd been teasing him earlier, and she deserved a little payback. She let herself relax into it, and for a moment, neither of them thought of anything but each other. Dawn came soft and pale. Hermione woke first, bleary and still sleepy. She could see the faint sockets under her eyes and the tiny red veins where she hadn't slept enough. Her wrists ached slightly. After all, she'd spent the day before in a fight, and while she'd come through it unscathed, subduing certain attackers had taken everything out of her. Loren lay beside her, a contented smile on his face. Irritation fluttered in her chest and she tapped him, not hard, just to make a point, and felt her wrist throb. Loren startled awake, grinned at the sight of her. "Good morning," he said softly. Her annoyance melted. "Morning," she answered. He scooched close, wrapped his arms around her waist, and buried his face in her neck. "I love you, Hermione," he mumbled. She started, but the familiar warm pressure of his cheek against her skin shut her up. He pressed a fingertip to the base of her throat, teasing and tender at once. She smiled and slipped from the bed to go wash, a small, private happiness settling in her. Meanwhile, in a different room of the hotel, Harry sat on the edge of a toilet seat with a tourist brochure spread across his knees. He'd woken up with his parents' loving but firm voices in his head telling him to make the most of his life, and he'd decided they were right. He was marking out places to visit in the United States: Central Park, Times Square, Fifth Avenue, the Statue of Liberty. Apparition would make travel quick. He could see the whole country if he tried. He made notes with a ballpoint pen, places to photograph, letters to send to Ron, thinking about this summer compared to others, remembering how he'd spent so many vacations at the Dursleys when his friends were off living real summers. He'd been to Godric's Hollow once, with Sirius and Remus, but it hadn't been pleasant. He wanted something different now: friends, adventure, and stories to tell. Dumbledore had booked him the room and said Aurors from the Ministry would be in touch, but Harry didn't plan to wait on paperwork. He wanted to find Loren and Hermione after breakfast. With less than a month left of summer, every day counted. He headed down to the hotel restaurant and almost walked into a cluster of familiar faces. Scrimgeour and Mad-Eye Moody were in low conversation at one table. Tonks and Remus were leaning together at another. Members of the Order dined openly beside Aurors. Sirius sat alone at a nearby table, but brightened when he saw Harry. "Harry," he called, "I was about to come looking for you." Harry grinned and carried his tray over. "Why are you eating on your own? Why not go join Remus?" "Adult experience," Sirius said with a wink. "Don't ruin someone else's date, even if it's your best mate." Harry hesitated. He wanted companions to show him around, but he didn't want to disturb Loren and Hermione if they were trying to be alone. After a distracted breakfast, he went to the front desk to ask for their room number. The clerk, either very trusting or very cooperative, gave it up without fuss. "What? They checked out already?" Harry said, eyes widening. The clerk nodded and smiled. "Yes, they left about an hour ago." Wizards come of age at 17. Loren's birthday was today. They had risen at dawn, left their New York hotel, and following the directions in a travel brochure, apparated to a volcano in eastern Maui, Haleakala. The volcano was dormant. Geologists could write reams about plate tectonics and ocean currents, and the long stretches of inactivity that suggested it hadn't erupted in 200 years, but even their densest reports finished with the same cautious note: future eruptions could not be ruled out. Tourists and travel companies treated that like the work of nervous academics and moved on. The area had been made into a scenic outlook, famous for its sunrise. The apparition had taken them 10 minutes. The walk from the trailhead to the crater took them another 10. Between the scattered lava piles, narrow sandy paths cut a short route to the rim. The sand was soft, and the climb tiring for anyone without much stamina, but for two wizards who could apparate, the distance barely mattered. Near the parking and access points, a handful of local drivers, darker-skinned, loud in their hawking, pressured tourists for fares. Whether you got overcharged seemed to depend on whom they thought they could fleece. From their manner, it did not look like any authority bothered them. At the crater, a patch of silversword, one of the world's rarest plants, fanned out in hundreds of stiff, silvery leaves. The plant held no obvious magic, yet it endured the chill and the blasting wind. As the breeze moved across the rim, the leaves rustled in unison, a sharp whisper beneath the greater sound of the wind. Loren looked almost pleased at being there. A scattering of campers waiting for the sunrise emerged from tents, cameras and long lenses pointed toward the horizon, faces solemn. Loren pulled out his camera and began fiddling with it. "What made you think of bringing me to see the sunrise?" he asked. "I'm taking you to see the sunset tonight as well," Hermione replied. "Miss Granger is so romantic," Loren said with a grin. Hermione stood close beside him and watched the small numbers on his screen, talking under her breath like a lecture. White balance auto, ISO 100, f11, aperture priority. She looked up at the horizon. Today was a good day. A sea of clouds lay level with them, surging between cliffs. Where earth met sky, a thin sliver of morning light glowed, faint and pulsing orange. Large swathes of sky were still deep blue. On a camera screen, they read almost purplish black, shifting toward greenish blue toward the lower rim, a layered painterly transition. "Start shooting now," Loren called. As if on cue, the sun burst up from behind the clouds, a red disk that stained half the sky as if a child had swept a crayon across it. Streaks of light swept the undulating volcanic ridges, bathing them in bright orange. Peaks floated like islands above the sea of clouds. Hermione turned to look at Loren. He took a few shots with interest. They were a little overexposed, but pleasing, beautiful, not breathtaking. There was nothing like a disappointed crease in his face. He hadn't been trying to capture some grand, flawless sunrise. Loren adjusted the settings once more, then stopped. He flipped the camera so it faced them, hooked his arm around Hermione, and coaxed her to look at the lens. He forced a brilliant smile. Click. The shutter sounded, freezing the moment. He lowered the camera and examined the preview. Both their heads were slightly enlarged by the wide lens. Loren's grin was broad and unabashed. Hermione's features were delicate and strong at once. Her cheek flushed with the morning's light like smudged blush, long curled lashes casting faint shadows. He had failed to nail the perfect sunrise, but he had caught something better. Loren stared at the screen, then at Hermione, then back at the screen again, clearly delighted. "Oh my, it's so beautiful." Hermione's eyes lit faintly. "What's beautiful?" "I'm praising myself for being so beautiful." She pursed her lips. It was his birthday. She let it pass. As the sun climbed higher, the blazing colors softened and faded, the light turning pale and even. The world smoothed into clear daylight. Wiltshire, Malfoy Manor. Draco sat by the fountain, a pouch of peacock feed in his hand, trying to keep his face composed. Gringotts goblins, pure-blood families being monitored, foreign merchants, all sources of intelligence, he muttered, tossing a few grains onto the paving. The peacocks, white-plumed and long-necked, regal even when pecking at food, lowered their heads and fed. He watched them, then sighed and produced 2 coins, actually communicators, from his pocket. One of his galleon communicators had several messages from Theodore and others. Through family contacts at the ministry, they'd learned that Minister Scrimgeour had been absent for 2 days, that Madame Bones was handling ministerial duties, and that most of the Auror office's main forces were inexplicably out of commission. There was only one person in their world for whom a surprise strike would be worth launching: Lord Voldemort. As a long-standing pure-blood family, the Malfoys sensed an opening. Whoever prevailed in the coming struggle would reshape the magical world. Before the storm broke, many were trying to position themselves, some to seize advantage, some merely to prepare to flee. Draco read the messages without replying. He glanced at the other coin, one fashioned like a bronze nut, which carried its own last message. The final text on it from the previous night was nothing but an exclamation mark, sent by Loren. An exclamation mark. Was he celebrating? Warning? Couldn't he have written a single word? It was maddening. The communicator was brilliant for all wizards, except, apparently, for its inventor. He slipped the communicator away and stared into the fountain to steady himself, mulling over other ways to gather news, when a familiar voice called from the entrance to the courtyard. "Draco." He froze, then turned. Surprise and disbelief slowly softened his features. 758, Sunset Mallory Square sat on the waterfront in Key West's Old Town. Travel guides raved that it had the world's most beautiful sunsets, and every evening people gathered to celebrate the dying light. Over the years, the tradition had become a tourist circus. Vendors, musicians on tour, locals, and gawking visitors jammed the plaza. 2 centuries ago, the American Magical Congress had banned apparition around densely populated Muggle areas, but secrecy laws tended to be enforced only when someone was caught. There were no Aurors on patrol that night, and Loren happened to have an unregistered spare wand, so he cast a disillusionment charm ahead of time to reduce the risk of a miscast with the Elder Wand, avoid overshooting or landing off course. All that remained was to mask the whoosh of displacement in the general clamor. The noise was perfect cover. Acrobats balanced on tin barrels, blonde hula hoop performers spun dozen hoops around their hips, cowboys cracked long whips, a blindfolded magician's revolver thundered, and bands pushed their amplifiers to the edge. Even so, their hoarse shouts were lost in the crowd's roar. Hermione, who had planned the itinerary, breathed a quiet sigh of relief. She had been worried the American Magical Congress might notice. Being detained today would mean calling Nancy for help, bothering Headmaster Dumbledore to arrange bail, and maybe even McGonagall finding out. She wondered, half-jokingly, whether diplomatic immunity extended to teenage travelers. Luckily, they'd gone unnoticed. It was past 6 when they reached the waterfront. The sun hung low on the horizon, and the sky was split, gold on one side, still clear blue on the other. A slightly salty breeze scattered the clouds into wisps, goose yellow and layered like a monet. The air also carried the comforting smells of food from trucks and street stalls. Loren crunched into Mexican-style grilled meat topped with gooey, stringy cheese. It was a wonderfully strange taste. He had always thought birthdays meant a good meal, dining out or cooking whatever he wanted. He had never imagined traveling this far just to watch a sunset. He had always let Hermione set the plans. Standing there with the distant journey and this magnificent sky, something in him shifted. These trips, the sunset, the whole evening felt like pieces of the affection she gave him. He glanced at Hermione. She held his hand and watched the blood-red sun sink. Her expression was soft and serene. Suddenly she turned to him. "Why aren't you taking pictures? The sunset is beautiful." Loren thought for a moment. Taking pictures meant a camera, fiddling with settings, and freeing both hands. And with the crowd pressing around them, she seemed worried about getting separated, which was why she held his arm so tightly. Pleasant enough, he decided. He smiled. "The sunset's beautiful, but I have a better view right next to me." Hermione stiffened and let go of his hand, her eyes cooling. "Your face says you have ill intentions." "How is that? We're a couple. Couples think things. And I wasn't lying. I honestly think you're prettier than the sunset." Loren leaned down for a kiss. Hermione recoiled at the smell of grilled meat and cheese on his breath and pressed her fair palm to his face, pushing him back. "No, it smells awful. You're disgusted with me." Loren had to admit Hermione's palm was incredibly soft. His first thought was how to fix his breath, find a place to brush and rinse, or if he could, slip a quick whirlwind sweep into his mouth when no one was looking. Instead, he found a simpler remedy, flavored drinks from a street vendor. Hermione watched the sun slide toward the sea and took a sip through a plastic straw, mint and lemon, cool and refreshing. Loren took 2 quick sips from his own cup, then, half joking, shoved his straw into hers and said seriously, "I'll get you a strawberry milkshake later. When we kiss, you'll taste like strawberries, and every time you eat strawberries after that, you'll think of me and my kiss." "I might stop liking strawberries," she said. "Don't worry, I know all your favorite flavors." He grinned. A faint light flickered in Hermione's eyes. She considered proposing a flavor she secretly found unacceptable, then decided against it, for fear he might actually try. "Let's find a spot on the beach, light a bonfire, and kiss from sunset until the stars come out." "How romantic," Loren began to daydream. "I explicitly object." "Objection overruled. It's my birthday, not yours, so no grumbling." He hummed, set his drink down, and cupped her cheeks. Their eyes met, one reflecting the fiery evening glow, the other the dimming sky, a twinge of panic fluttering in Hermione's. She closed her eyes. Loren lowered his head and kissed her, tasting faint lemon and mint. The sun slid into the sea, its inner circle a pure gold, its outer ring a fierce orange-red. Seabirds coasted overhead and boats left trailing wakes. The daytime clamor softened. A wandering musician began to strum a wooden guitar and sing a low ballad. The music and voice were gentle, merging with the hush like sails settling in a calm harbor. The afterglow wrapped the town. Loren exhaled slowly. The twilight, quieter and more intimate than the brilliant sunset, felt somehow more beautiful. The sea and sky showed complex colors. Tiny waves broke against the shore. Wispy clouds drifted above. Hermione breathed softly beside him. Her lips were flushed and slightly wet. They were very close, each inhaling the other's scent. When they opened their eyes and looked at each other, nothing else existed. "Hmm? Hermione smiled, the light in her face small and warm. "Happy 17th birthday." 7:59, night and bonfire. It was the beginning of autumn, just past midnight. The Big Dipper pointed southwest. The sun sat at 135 degrees ecliptic longitude, signs that the summer heat was easing, growth was ripening, and harvests were near. No one here paid much attention to such astronomy. Loren had set up a tent on the beach, unrolled his sleeping bag, and hung a small nightlight, turning the little space into a bedroom. Without the undetectable extension charm, it felt a bit cramped, but cramped was exactly what he wanted. They planned to camp here tonight and head back to New York in the morning. There was still Voldemort business to sort out. Hermione had built a bonfire outside, just a few branches piled to last the night. Crack. Wood split and sparks flew. Loren crawled out of the tent and found Hermione sitting on the sand in the moonlight, her face calm and beautiful. He sat beside her and looked up. A slender waning crescent hung in a sky strewn with stars, their silver light spilling everywhere. "Look at the sky," he said. "All the stars are out. Yes, the moon isn't full, but it's still beautiful like this." Hermione rested her head on his shoulder, her hair soft against him, the stars reflected in her bright eyes. The steady sound of the surf washed over them. The daytime clamor had faded until only a reassuring quiet remained. "Do you know why I planned today's route the way I did?" Loren asked. "No. I want to watch the sunrise and sunset with you every day." Wow. Miss Granger had a way with words. Loren felt warmth flood through him. He wrapped an arm around her, buried his face in her hair, and breathed in her scent. Night deepened. They stayed like that, looking at the stars, the quiet bonfire, the endless sea, listening to the crackle of wood, the whisper of wind and water, their hearts full. The communicator in his pendant vibrated softly a few times. He didn't have to fish it out to know it was Harry. Dozens of little messages had come through today, all asking trivial things. Where were they? Why had they checked out and left so early? When were they coming back? There was no respect in his tone. He hadn't even sent a birthday greeting. "There are some things I want to tell you," Loren murmured. "The things from the night Voldemort was ended." Hermione remembered their talk from that night. "They existed before Voldemort came back," Loren said. "Not exactly thoughts, more like stories. Stories Flamel put together from clues collected over the years." "Tell me." "The story goes back 7 years, before I even had my Hogwarts letter. Nicholas Flamel, guided by a dream, gave me 2 magical books. One explained hieroglyphic symbols. Later, it became what people call the Fantastic Book, an alchemical work he left behind. The other was the Book of Abraham, which held secrets tied to the Philosopher's Stone." "Have you figured out who Abraham was?" "Not yet. We only have theories about the book's origin." Loren twined a strand of her hair around his finger. "Do you remember Miss Doddridge's story in the time-space gap about Merlin working with Muggle kings to banish immortal wizards who'd conquered death? Flamel went through that history, and combining it with my reading of the Book of Abraham, he formed some hypotheses." The bonfire burned quietly. Hermione turned on her full attention. Flamel divided wizarding history into 4 periods. First was the Age of Ancient Magic, at the very beginning. A few extraordinarily gifted wizards plunged into the dark arts without restraint, breaking life's limits to achieve immortality. That set off a long era of turmoil until Merlin was born. Merlin, working with Morgan Le Fay and others, banished those dark wizards and wiped most traces of them from the world. Next came the classical magic period. Freed from ancient evil, magic and Muggle civilizations both grew. Progress and conflict went hand in hand. In a dream, a man named Helba was inspired to create Horcruxes. Unwilling to be corrupted by them, he destroyed his own Horcruxes and took his life. Later, the 4 founders came together and founded a school the likes of which hadn't been seen. Hogwarts took in young wizards regardless of background and eased tensions between Muggles and wizards. The founders also followed clues left by Merlin and Morgan, and using their combined magic, put out the last embers of the ancient dark wizard's influence. Then came the modern magic period. Hogwarts inspired schools across the world. Wizards united and, over nearly 1,000 years, built a distinct magical civilization. Governments and laws kept order. Scholars abandoned the dangerous practices of ancient magic in favor of safer, more controllable classical magic. But shadows always existed. Some wizards discovered fragments of ancient knowledge and, seeking immortality, spread the Black Death. It was then that Flamel, again guided by a dream, deciphered the Book of Abraham, created the Philosopher's Stone, and helped stop the plague. The coastal wind never ceased. A damp chill crept in. Looking over these periods, Loren went on, whenever magical civilization faced a crisis, a few wizards, people who had unusual encounters and became legends, would appear and steer magic and wizards back on course. Hermione thought for a moment, then asked sharply, "Is this what you meant before about distinct characteristics?" "Maybe," Loren's voice softened. "Flamel and I can't be absolutely certain. The bravery of Gryffindor, Ravenclaw's wisdom, Hufflepuff's patience, Slytherin's pride, even Hellbow's. Many legendary wizards showed striking traits, and their magical deeds linked closely to those qualities. Some had multiple traits: Flamel, Dumbledore, even older figures like Merlin and Morgan Le Fay. I found clues studying Dementors and Boggarts." He pointed at the fire. The flames leapt and briefly shaped into the vague, gliding form of a Dementor. "A wizard's magic ties to their soul. Strong emotions affect the soul, and the soul affects magic. Changes in the Patronus charm, Dumbledore's constant talk about love, these all point to that. Delving deep into the soul brings wizards closer to the essence of magic. The path to the soul's depths lies in these characteristics. Some wizards stumbled onto that path without intending to, like the founders, who simply embodied certain traits. Others followed it consciously. Hellbow, for example. A wizard who could make Horcruxes had to be exceptional. It's not right to call him merely despicable. And then dark wizards deliberately courted death's secrets, spreading the Black Death to learn more. Remember the Bloody Mary story? It was spread by a dark wizard who tangled legends, the Countess Lee Strab, Elizabeth Bathory, Mary Y, trying to experiment with blood and cruelty. She failed. Hermione's expression turned thoughtful. "So Voldemort's trait is spreading fear? Spreading death?" Voldemort feared death and wouldn't face it directly. He never understood its essence. His fear, and the fear he spread, was shallow. It always circled back to fear of dying. But many people don't fear death, and Voldemort never grasped what true fear is. Loren shook his head. His power came from his soul. Merope used a love potion to control Tom Riddle, and that's how his soul was formed. He has no love. His emotions are shallow, his soul hollow. He tore it into pieces with Horcruxes, making magic leak out through the cracks. That's it. He paused. So 16 years ago, he was defeated by Harry's mother's love, and even after his return, he suffered setbacks. Even without me, someone with a deeper understanding of death and fear could have stopped him in other ways. Dumbledore's staged death, Harry's brush with death and return, those were deeper understandings than Voldemort's. The firelight warmed Hermione's face. She nodded, then asked suddenly, "You said there were 4 periods. What about the last one?" "The last one is now, the history we're living." His words mixed with the wind and the surf, sometimes close as a whisper in her ear, sometimes seeming far away. Hermione pressed her lips together, wrapped her arms tighter around Loren's waist, and leaned in. He thought she might be cold, so he drew her closer, rested his chin on her shoulder, and spoke into the curve of her neck. On a large scale, the Statute of Secrecy separated magic from Muggle society, but the two civilizations are eroding that barrier, or rather merging. In finer ways, Voldemort rediscovered Horcrux lore, stoked unrest, persecuted innocents, and dragged other races into the conflict. Dumbledore's plan eradicated him. The future is already taking shape. In the not-too-distant future, a new generation of wizards will rise to lead the magical world. They, or rather we, will, with a more open view and more flexible means, promote communication between wizards and muggles and speed the integration of the two civilizations. Hermione let herself imagine that future. A small, eager light appeared in her eyes. "It sounds wonderful." "But integration can also mean absorption," Loren said. "Two societies, two civilizations, wizards and muggles, magic and technology, could end up as one, a single human civilization." The waves crashed on, answering him in the only way they could. Wizards will continue to push the boundaries of magic. Ilvermorny, for example, is ahead of Hogwarts in some ways. They accept and make use of other magical beings. You've seen how many wand core types they recognize compared to Ollivanders. They embrace and absorb technological advances. Their castle sits on Mount Greylock, and they can power electric lights without wires. Their alchemy labs, their Parseltongue research. As he talked, his tone grew colder, a thread of cruelty under it. Magic must become reliable, controllable knowledge, and rigorous systems must be built. That's the experimental method of natural science. One day, wizards will discover that emotions and the soul are central to magic. How will they experiment then? Hermione shivered. Maybe rules would be drawn up, research projects approved, ethics enforced. But can such work ever really be controlled? Loren answered quietly, as if to himself. Negative emotions spread more easily than positive ones. War, plague, famine, the riders of death spread fear. There will always be dark wizards trying the same things in Muggle society. In an even more prosperous information age, there will be covert methods tied to Muggle technology to control information channels and dominate social media. Loren, I still think that kind of future is far from us, Hermione said. Yes, technology advances much faster than magic, and Muggle prosperity is closer to our present. That leads to another possibility. Loren pressed closer, feeling their shared warmth. Muggles will continue down the technological path. They will need to solve energy and food shortages. They will turn to nuclear power and demand more land. That will inevitably encroach on the habitats of magical creatures. Merpeople, for instance. Hermione remembered swimming in the Black Lake 2 years ago. Her eyes grew distant. Their deformity was caused by nuclear pollution. Yes, nuclear power addresses energy crises, but its pollution will only become more severe. Habitats will deteriorate until technology advances enough to reshape the environment and accommodate all magical beings. Wizards may secure territory for themselves, but how many marvelous creatures will be lost before that? This sounds closer than I thought, Hermione said, stunned. Are the wars Slytherin and the others warned about rooted in these conflicts? Perhaps, through prophecy or extraordinary insight, some legendary wizards did foresee such crises and left clues and safeguards. Hermione's eyes brightened. Is there a way to fix it? Wizards are only human, not gods. After hundreds or thousands of years, what they left behind might help, or it might not. What do you mean? 760. Your gift is gone. The vast night sky gradually brightened as more stars appeared. The bonfire crackled softly, its light reflecting in both their eyes. Loren twined a strand of Hermione's hair around his finger. You know the story of the Book of Abraham. Maybe you've noticed that whenever the book shows up, it guides the chosen wizard. While they work on the Philosopher's Stone and pursue truth, it also leads them to save the world and avert disasters. Hermione's clear eyes widened a fraction, disbelief flickering across her face. Wizards who get the Book of Abraham all save the world. Is that the origin of the sage legend? Loren slipped an arm around her waist and waited for her to think it through. After a few moments, Hermione frowned. Are you saying these disasters were all foreseen by Abraham? I don't think so. Loren inhaled the faint scent of her shampoo. Abraham, the legendary wizard who created the Philosopher's Stone, may have intended the book as a treasure for his people or descendants, something to help them through tough times and strengthen their group. He certainly wouldn't have been planning to save the entire world thousands of years later. Then why? Once the Book of Abraham was created, it became part of the world, not just Abraham's property. Beyond his intentions, the book's legacy and how events unfold seem to follow another, stronger will. Loren's voice dropped. The world's will. Hermione listened, half following. Explain. Loren's pace slowed, letting her digest each point. The idea of a world mind goes back to Plato, who imagined the world as a living organism with a collective consciousness like individual neurons forming our mind. In modern times, some scientists compare the Earth to a self-regulating organism, not implying it literally has consciousness, but that living things and the environment interact in coherent feedback loops that steer the planet toward a stable state favorable to life. Flamel believed there's a similar, complex connection between magical creatures and their environment, and that the magical world has its own grand consciousness, part of that Gaia-like mind. It can't converse with a single creature, but because magic transcends natural laws, this magical will is more flexible than Gaia's and can exert influence more directly. Hermione stared into the flames and, after a long moment, said thoughtfully, So you mean this will is affecting how the Book of Abraham is passed down, guiding successive sages to stop disasters? When Flamel was a copyist in Paris, he dreamed clues about the book. Centuries later, he received inspiration the same way and passed the book on to me. Loren watched the flames reflected in the waves of light. Flamel thought it was prophetic talent. Maybe it was. A very small number of chosen wizards can peer through the fog of time, catch glimpses of the future at the right moment, and draw inspiration that shapes the present. That kind of magic has no rules, can't be taught, and even diviners struggle to control it. He chuckled softly. Sounds like coincidence, doesn't it? Unpredictable eyes in the heavens, prophecies that can't be reproduced, knowledge obtained in dreams or delirium. Hermione's eyes widened. So prophecy itself is a manifestation of that magical consciousness. We can't be certain, but Flamel and I lean that way. Loren's tone softened. Abraham left the method to make the Philosopher's Stone, and he placed a powerful curse on it. Over thousands of years, the book didn't bring prosperity to Abraham's tribe. Instead, through various coincidences, it passed among a few wizards and slowly wove the legend of the sage. I see. Hermione tugged his sleeve, nesting closer like a child into a blanket, and rubbed her cheek against his. What did the other legendary wizards leave behind? Merlin and Morgan Le Fay summarized their experiences from the Dark Ages to guide future generations. Loren gestured toward the fire. At his motion, the flames reversed. The glowing embers and ash reassembled into whole logs. He let the motion go, and the logs burned anew, the fire's intensity unchanged. If a wizard ever appears who's unstoppable, they can be banished from this world, using magic tied to fragments of time and space. That's the magic left for that purpose. So those two powers came from Morgan and Merlin. Hermione raised an eyebrow. No wonder you can control them. Salazar Slytherin is more mysterious. He left many things, but Flamel and I still don't understand his intent. The Chamber of Secrets and the Basilisk, the wand and the locket, and most oddly, Doddridge Miss in the time-space rift. The first items were left before he left Hogwarts. He may not have foreseen the future then. But after he left, he arranged for Doddridge Miss to remain. Hermione went thoughtful. Maybe it was to send a message to us? Who knows? They're all so enigmatic. Loren buried his face in her neck and breathed deep. These old ones never expected relics from different eras would come together and influence each other, revealing me another path. What path? Hermione's neck prickled. She pulled it in. The path to saving the world? Loren kissed her, quick and decisive, and said nothing more. He hadn't really expected this, yet somehow the world did seem to orbit him. Having stumbled into this magical realm, he'd once thought the great crisis was Voldemort. He imagined waiting for the old headmaster to die and Harry to follow, then a fairy tale ending after graduation, a comfy life as a man behind the Minister for Magic, travel when he retired, fulfilling Dumbledore's dream. Now, with the main quest laid upon him, he felt neither panic nor fear. Historical calculations suggested that war wouldn't break out in their era. There was only a small urgency left. Merpeople were endangered and could vanish in 10 or 20 years if the Muggle world continued polluting the seas. That mattered. Hermione, curling in, sneaked a sideways glance at him. They'd talked late into the night about mysteries, Abraham, Merlin, Morgan, Slytherin, Nicholas Flamel, and he'd been oddly nonchalant about it. She felt another playful suck on her neck, a ticklish annoyance. Ever since Bates's werewolf condition had been cured, Loren had grown relaxed and carefree. He'd moved from nervousness to confidence, his magic and the Elder Wand making him unruffled. She noticed a faint, salty, fishy scent at the tip of her nose. Hermione, what shower gel are you using? You smell amazing. Humph. Hermione snorted softly, biting her lip, trying to figure out how to make him talk seriously. Slurp. He was nipping at her earlobe. Stop, Hermione pushed him, face flushed. If you won't finish the conversation, go to sleep. We have to go back to New York tomorrow. Her mild scolding sounded more like a sulking child than a reprimand. Loren suppressed a laugh, held her close, inhaled her scent, and murmured, It isn't over yet. It's my birthday, and we're a couple. Can't we kiss and hug? Hermione rolled her eyes. He always had excuses. She couldn't simply give in, but she also couldn't easily refute him. She pursed her lips. Do you remember the birthday present I mentioned? I remember. Loren answered immediately. Hermione leaned close and whispered a few words into his ear. He widened his eyes, 7 parts bliss, 3 parts disbelief. That was the plan, Hermione said quietly, but because of how you behaved, the plan's been canceled. Please forgive me. No, Hermione's tone was flat, almost cold. What's done is done. Waves don't roll back, and time doesn't flow backward. Who says time can't flow backward? Loren clutched the locket at his chest, closed his eyes, murmured, then stood and stepped backward into the tent. It wasn't real time reversal, just theatrics, but he stumbled slightly and almost fell. Hermione kept her composure. She sat by the fire a while longer, rearranged the logs, and maintained the spell. When sleepiness hit, she brushed the sand from her trousers and went into the tent. Loren lay in his sleeping bag, still muttering about reversing time and space, as if acting sincerely could change her mind and make her give him the gift again. Hermione eased into her sleeping bag and after a moment rolled over and kissed his forehead. That could count as a present. Ottery St. Catchpole, the burrow. A crooked chimney clung to the rickety house, white smoke curling from the top. In the kitchen, someone was frying eggs. The sizzle filled the air as flames licked the pan and translucent whites turned golden. Toast browned and milk warmed in a double boiler, giving off a rich, milky aroma. The usually cramped kitchen bustled under the hands of a short, stout, red-haired housewife. Footsteps drifted down from upstairs. Marjorie, Sirius's stepdaughter, and a muggle girl staying at the burrow for the summer, had already padded down. Betty was at home recuperating after childbirth, and the curious girl delighted in every detail of a wizarding household. She was the first up each morning, eyes shining as she inspected the enchanted utensils. Grimmauld Place had similar things, but they'd been idle for years and felt awkward to use, unlike the lively tools at the burrow. Thump, thump, thump! The footfalls stopped as Marjorie reached the ground floor. Lighter footsteps came from the hall, and a girl appeared in the kitchen, wearing an oversized wizarding robe embroidered with a Gryffindor crest, one of the family robes some older brother had left behind. "Good morning, Molly," Marjorie greeted warmly, her gaze sweeping the kitchen. "It smells amazing," Molly beamed. For a mother who'd risen early to feed everyone, there was no greater comfort than that. "Breakfast will be ready soon, Marjorie. Want to go to Diagon Alley with me this morning? George and Fred's joke shop is there, full of novel things you can play with without a wand. You'll love it." Molly wiped her hands on her apron. "Bill and Charlie are busy with Gringotts. I heard they unearthed some new ruins and haven't come back for days. Honestly, what could be busier than a joke shop and the Ministry of Magic? I'll have to have a word with those goblins." Marjorie's eyes darted, and she edged toward the door. "Actually, I'd rather take you to our supermarket. I think you'd like it." "A Muggle supermarket?" Molly paused. She turned, sharp and amused. "You're trying to distract me. Are you hiding something?" No. Did George and Fred tell you to do this?" No. Did Ron get into trouble again?" No. Then it's—" Molly hesitated, then remembered two reliable sons who hadn't been home for days. Her eyes widened. "Bill and Charlie?